Tempo é muito escasso, essa rede desenhada em salvador, som e xingar. Tempo é muito escasso, essa rede desenhada em salvador, som. Se diga
Hello and welcome to the Weekly Stuff Podcast with Jonathan Lack
and Sean Chapman.
We are here to talk about stuff. This week on the show, we are going to be playing for you a topic we actually recorded a couple weeks ago around the time when we did our top 10 video games of 2020, where we promised there, and we did record, a full spoiler cast for 13 Sentinels, Aegis Rim. One of the best video games of 2020. It was number 2 on your top 5.
Yes, it was.
It was number 5 on mine. It is a phenomenal game that you cannot talk about in short bursts because it is so fucking complicated.
Yeah.
But we have done a full spoiler cast on it, so I know several listeners had kind of picked that game up because we started hyping it. I think you heard about it from a listener.
I heard about it from a listener, yeah.
Yeah, so I think we owed you guys this one. And so we will have a full spoiler cast. That will be the main topic today. We're holding that for a rainy day because I am going to be traveling the weekend that this is sort of coming out, so couldn't record. I'm going to be going back to Iowa. So this is the last time, Sean, you and I will be recording in person for a while.
Yep.
Who knows what's going to happen? I say that. I don't fucking know what's going to happen.
Who knows? I might somehow end up in Iowa. It's like anything's possible. It's like the whole, the school system implodes. Totally probable. And I end up in Iowa and then record over there. Who fucking knows?
Have you ever been to Iowa?
I've driven through Iowa once.
You've driven through Iowa.
Well,
okay.
I was like a kid, so I did not physically drive through. I was driven through by my parents in Iowa.
Yes. I was just thought about that for a second. I'm like, I have spent so much time of my life in Iowa, including living there now. But anyway, yeah. So yes, that's what we'll be playing later today. Obviously, we don't know what's happened in the last week. Although, Sean, let's celebrate for a second.
Okay.
This is the first show going out in the post-Trump presidency.
As far as we
barring a violent coup d'etat.
This is really important to emphasize that this is being pre-recorded. So,
yes.
As far as we know, if things work the way things are supposed to work, what you just said is true.
Joe Biden is president.
Yes.
When this is coming out. I will probably not put the podcast out or cut this part if there has been a violent coup d'etat, because no one wants to listen to 13 Sentinels. I will tell you to go listen to New York Times or something. Yeah. But no, I mean, God, Sean, again, I know we don't want to take the victory lap too early, especially because of all the shit that's been going on.
Yes, and also because this is...
And we're holding our breath.
Yeah, and right now we are still not out of the woods in the way hopefully we will be by the time this podcast is out.
But I think the last couple months have been so traumatizing in so many different ways, Sean.
Oh, yeah.
And to the degree that I don't think any of us have gotten to actually celebrate the idea of, we beat him.
Uh-huh.
And there was a tweet the other day from a reporter pointing out that Biden, his chief of staff, Ron Klain, had listed out what the first couple of executives' orders were going to be on day one. And I saw that, and it's like, we're going to get rid of the Muslim ban. We're going to rejoin Paris. We're going to do this and this. And we also know he has all these immigration plans. And I just took this breath and went it's going to be over. Oh my God. And again, asterisk all of that.
Yeah.
But it was the first, I think it was one of the first moments where I got to fully digest for a second, there is another day coming.
Uh-huh.
And we've had so many dark things to talk about, and we're going to have plenty more dark things to talk about. But there's a chance now that we can fix things, and it's really nice.
Yeah, there is an idea of hope.
Yeah,
that's floating out there.
I'll just say, election night 2016, the hope was in 4 years we have the House, Senate, presidency again. We did it. Yeah. It hasn't really felt real yet, but we did do it, and that's nice.
Yeah. Well, now it just is about leveraging that into the meaningful change that we need, right?
Yes.
That is the exhausting thing is
and in the immediate short term, solving the pandemic.
Yes, no, that is the for me personally, the reason why that realization does not hit home is every week being in budget meetings and things like that at the school being we are fucking fucked if we don't.
But it
this
is
soon.
it is the reason I'm
Yeah.
happiest that Joe Biden is going to be president, because he's going to take this seriously.
Yeah. No, if we had 4 more years of Trump, we would be completely fucked.
I mean,
truly completely fucked. I can say pretty definitively.
It's really scary to think about. If Trump were president for another 4 years, millions would die of coronavirus because we would be doing nothing. The vaccine wouldn't get out in time. I just it's impossible to imagine.
Yeah,
They're
if there's not like pretty severe like immediate action, which I think is going to happen as soon as the Biden administration happens or like comes in to address like budgeting and like finances and stuff for schools. Like I legitimately do not know what would happen to the public school system. Like if Trump was still president, I have no idea how the public schooling system in America would even exist for like another school year.
I mean, it might not, because like they were blocking all the state and local aid, which now we're going to get because we have the Senate. Anyway, this isn't a political episode. We're going to be talking about 13 Sentinels, which is political in its own way. So you'll hear about all that. We go off on Reagan in this discussion, so that's a fun one. Yeah.
Well, it's a good episode when we get to talk about how much Ronald Reagan fucking sucked.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyway, hopefully I have gotten back safe to Iowa, and I'm still alive when this comes out. Because that's the way it's going to go out if there is a coup, is I have died in the middle of it, and no one was there to stop the upload.
That's a grim thought.
That's a grim thought.
Yeah.
I always do this before a car trip. I make this joke on the podcast, and one day it's going to come back to bite me.
Well, no, it's not, because you'll be dead, so you won't be able to feel the bite, so it'll be fine.
All right, this is getting weird. Should we go talk about 13 Sentinels?
Let's talk about 13 Sentinels, Aegis Rim.
Okay, so Sean, you had the idea,
yes,
or the insistence, that we should talk about 13 Sentinels, Aegis Rim in depth, because when it came time for our top 10 list, this was on both of ours.
Yep.
It was your number 2 game of the year.
Yes.
It's my number 5 game of the year. I wouldn't say that means I like it less. I had a more competitive list.
Yeah, you played a lot more games than me. You played about 2 times as many games this year, or last year, I guess, than I did.
I think more than 2, because you only had 10. I had like 40 I was choosing from.
Okay, yes.
But yes. No, but we both love this game. It is extremely unique. We talked about it on the Best Of show, but we kind of left it spoiler-free for a couple of reasons. One, we thought, a lot of people were going to be hearing about it for the first time, maybe. Mm-hmm. And this is definitely a game you don't want spoiled.
Yes. And also that podcast was about 4.5 hours long.
Yeah, without us spoiling anything.
Yes, and I realized, because when we had our text message back and forth about, like, what are we going to do about talking about this game, I was like, if we don't say that we're just going to do a different recording, we will end up talking about it for about 2 hours on that fucking end of the year podcast. So we have to just push it off to its own podcast.
Yes, so for posterity's sake, we are going to spend today talking about 13 Sentinels, Aegis Rim, which is an amazing and mind-blowing game, and it is going to be fun to finally kind of break this down as a spoiler cast here. So, but I will let you lead it, because I think you have sat with this game longer. I only finished it a couple days ago when we were recording this.
Yes.
And a couple days before we did our top 10, so it was it came in hot for me. But you've had some time to sit with this absolutely bonkers fucking game. So where do you want to start?
Yeah, so, I mean, I finished it about a little bit more than a month ago at this point. We've both platinumed it, which this is like a very easy game to platinum, because it's basically play all the story stuff and then get S ranks on all the tactics missions.
The only challenge is that some of the tactics missions are a little tough, but you do it pretty easily.
Yeah, you can do it pretty easily.
Especially in the end game, you can just pour points into things and really beef up your characters, and then you try it once and you're like, that didn't quite work, let's do it again. Oh, I didn't take a single hit.
Yes, it is very fun in the end game to just be like, oh, I've got a stupid number of nanochips, let me just upgrade this one character's damage, just go and just dump everything into make your laser very powerful.
Yes.
But yeah, so I have also set up my laptop here with remote play, just in case we need to refer to something in the 315 scenes that are in the game.
Is there an official count?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
And I also showed you, Jonathan, that there's a secret scene at the very end that you can just secretly unlocks in the event timeline that I didn't know about until I was setting up this thing on remote play. I was like, what? There's another scene.
Yes.
Maybe there is further in random bits of narrative information still sealed in this fucking bonkers, ridiculous game.
Yes.
But yeah, so I guess to just kind of set it up, like we talked about this on the end of the year podcast, but like what the game is in terms of its narrative structure, which is part of what is like makes it so fascinating and so compelling, is that it is, as you've described it, Jonathan, it is like thoroughly non-linear, while still being clearly like a narrative. Obviously, you can have lots of like non-linear type like media and stuff like that. Like lots of games are totally and utterly non-linear, but they typically don't have what you would say is like a clear narrative content to it. So this is like totally non-linear. It's got 13 protagonists. You can select them mostly in any order you want. Follow their stories up until like the handful of roadblocks that they have, which are very few. Experiencing the story in kind of whatever order you want. And the story is structured thus such that each character's narrative is one small piece in a very, very large, very complex puzzle that is constantly unfolding to the player in surprising, unexpected ways. That is constantly like kind of revolutionizing your perspective on what the game is talking about, what it is doing, what is like literally happening in the game, and then also like what is the game dealing with in a thematic sense. And it just creates this massive, ridiculous pile of different sort of concepts, images, thematic ideas, like references to different science fiction and other narrative archetypes pulled from like otaku type media, like Sailor Moon and stuff like that. And it's just like bringing this ridiculous number of ideas together, and then you are sifting through it and trying to make sense of it on your own, constructing this, like, as I talked about on the Game of the Year podcast, this mosaic of what the overall story is, that you are so zoomed in on all those little individual chapters, consuming what they're giving you, putting pieces together in the blank spaces between those chapters, and then at the end you are like kind of stepping back and trying to make sense of and admire the narrative as it has finally kind of put its full self together.
There's a real like rich game theory discussion, not game theory in the sense of like nuclear war, I mean like academic theory of games discussion have here about perspective and POV.
Yeah.
Because the game is always operating on two POVs. There is the POV of whoever you are situated with, because there's really, until the very, very end, there's no scene that is not from one specific POV.
Yeah.
But with every POV you're playing, you also are balancing your own player perspective of this, like, you're not omniscient because you don't know everything yet. The game is omniscient.
For most of it, you know nothing.
Yeah.
Or what you know is wrong.
Right. But you typically know more than the POV you are situated in, especially the further you go, because you're putting it together. And so it is a constant balancing act of the in-game diegetic POV and your extra diegetic POV. And I don't want to get too technical with that, but it's like it's one of the things that's really fascinating and pretty singular about the game, is balancing those two things. Because you're right, plenty of games have nonlinearity in all sorts of ways. Breath of the Wild is nonlinear in the sense that you can go tackle it however you want, and the only points that are really fixed are you're going to do the same beginning and the same end as everyone else, but you can see everything else in a different order. But there's a pretty close linkage there between your POV and Link's, right? Even to the point where like Link is unlocking his memories as you find them, and all of that is putting it together. Like most games try to collapse the POV of the player and the protagonist in some way or another. Or they adopt something like a visual novel, which is more novelistic styles of POV, which can be first person, they can be third person. This is different.
Even then, the vast majority of visual novels are written in the first person out of the eyes of whoever the protagonist character is. Sort of in the tradition of choose your own adventure novels.
Right.
And that is, you're absolutely right that one of the remarkable things about 13 Sentinels is its mastery of perspective, and like I think always trying to sort of create space for the player to really adopt their own weird perspective and like POV on the game's narrative events. And the game is structured such that there are so many different avenues by which the player can experience scenes with the knowledge that they have gained from wherever they are in the game. And so there are a huge number of different scenes that you can watch the first time through and have a completely different sort of takeaway of what that scene is talking about, depending on what you know about what is happening in the world, because there are so many different alternative theories presented throughout the game about what's happening here, whether it's time travel, whether it's you're in the space station, why is the apocalypse happening, what are the kaiju, are they kaiju, What is going on with the different like sectors, the different people. Are they happening in different times? Are they happening at the same time? And there's like so many different ways that like dreams, and whether dreams are dreams, whether dreams are memories, whether memories are dreams.
Yeah.
Right? Like all of that. Who are these people? If there are different versions of these people, which one are they? Are they the same person? Are they not the same person? Like those kinds of experiences. And they're all layered on top of each other so thoroughly that you can experience the game in like such different ways depending on where you encounter what information.
Like, I'm thinking about this here. So I have my little art book that came with the physical copy because Atlas likes to put little art books in things. And it's actually very helpful for this game. I had my art book next to me for like the first 10 hours, Sean, because every time a character would come up, I'd like flip through some like, oh, that's Ai Sekigahara. Okay,
Yes.
I remember that guy from this scene. And I would look at this because it has basically just all the basic like character models. But on the back of the art book, it just has a picture of your cat friend.
Yes.
They call him Fluffy in English. Isn't she just calling him Shippo?
She calls him Tail.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Because of like the white spot he has to get in the tail.
Yeah. So you have Fluffy / Shippo, and you have BJ the robot, who is actually Miura the robot.
Yes.
And I'm just thinking about like, okay, I played a lot of Megumi as soon as I got her because I found her fucking fascinating.
Yes.
Because the hook of her story is she starts talking to a cat who tells her about witches.
Yeah, like hers is by far the most out there because she is just like a full-on, like it's playing off of the magical girl genre tropes of Sailor Moon, or it's very reminiscent of Madoka Magica in being like a very dark turn on that kind of concept where it's like, there's all these witches out there, and you need to take this magic gun and go shoot them. By the way, by witches, I mean your friends at school.
Yes. And I mainlined as much of that as I could, and there's a couple roadblocks here and there. But so I had no idea who the fuck this cat was.
Yeah.
But I know if I had played things in a slightly different order, I would have been given some of the breadcrumbs to see that's Jiro Izumi in a different form.
Yeah, from the original, whether the original or not, but like the 3 loops ago, is they call him in the like timeline.
Izumi, who's like a character in like 7 different forms over the course of the game.
427, right?
Yeah.
The prisoner number.
Yes. And the same thing with BJ the robot, because Natsuno is the other one that, like, Natsuno was probably my favorite single, like, storyline in this. Because hers just is so propulsive and fun, and her hook is really good also, of her being this girl obsessed with sci-fi who meets a robot who she thinks is an alien, and BJ just doesn't correct her.
Yeah.
And at no point do you actually learn, like, why does she assume he's an alien? It's like, oh, it's just because she's a girl who's, like, read a lot of sci-fi.
Yeah.
But anyway, you just think it's BJ, but Keitaro Miura's story and the other stories that, like, lead you to know who BJ is, I think it's specifically it's Hijiyama, or who is it?
Sekigahara has a scene pretty early on because he's the one who's kind of partnered with Miura in the previous loop.
So it's Sekigahara. I could have gotten him just as early as Natsuno and learned some of this stuff like, that's not a robot alien named BJ, that's Miura. But I didn't. And so it was a twist when I got there in Natsuno's, but it would have played very differently.
Yeah, and so every scene has, like, and it's, like, interesting to, like, when you go back through and rewatch some of them, to be like, oh, this scene has 2 or 3 different points that are the twist of the scene.
Yeah.
That depending on what you know, you don't see them as twists or not, right? And so that's, like, part of how I think the game has its, like, 5 to 10 minute what the fuck type moments, is that they are so multi-layered that it's designed for you to, for some things, just roll right over. And it's like, oh, this is, like, of course they're not aliens, right? Like, it's for some people, depending on the order you play the game, the kaiju not being aliens might be, like, kind of like, not a late game twist. It couldn't possibly be a late game twist, but, like, late early game twist of, like, oh my god, they're not aliens? Whereas you might learn that, like, almost immediately, right? And
I think I learned it pretty quickly because I did the first couple of Tomi missions. And Usami-chan, whatever her name, real name is Tomi Kisaragi. And you get that pretty quickly there because it's like, shit, these are machines.
Yes, and so, like, that's one of those things where when you're doing a lot of the Natchan or Natsumi missions, she's, for most of her story, is just assuming that this is all weird alien bullshit because that's her frame of reference. And if you're, like, really sticking to that POV and depending on where you go from her, because some of the stories barely deal with the kaiju at all, in the flashback stuff, you might just go for a long session of this game being like, oh yeah, they're aliens, I don't know. Or you might just, every time you're with Natsumi, like, haha, of course they're not aliens. It's just like, and you just kind of roll over what for some people might be twists. And that's one of those POV things that to me is like, looking at this game as an artifact of just like narrative construction is some of the most fascinating, like one of the most fascinating lenses to look at it as. Is like, how do you do this? Like, I just want to have like watch like a 3-hour interview with Kamitani and the other people at Vanillaware who were like the main narrative people working on the game. It's like, how did you do this? And I know it took them fucking forever to make the game, partially because of this, and it's like lots of it got rewritten and stuff like that. But it's just like, how do you keep all the stuff in your head, and like how do you eventually put together the event archive that has like the 315 scenes or whatever in it, and like put them in what like is chronological order, because there is no time travel in the game, which is another thing that like you could find out in the mid-ish portion of the game, or you might find it as like one of the last things.
It was pretty late for me in because just the order of characters I kind of went through. Like I started to suspect, because there's plenty of breadcrumbs left.
Yeah, it's particularly like around, I got the scene where you go back to the World War II section, and you're like picking through, I think it's maybe Miura, I forget which of the two characters it is, but you're like picking through the wreckage after World War II has been destroyed, or the World War II era has been destroyed by the kaiju, and realizing it's like, this doesn't make any fucking sense, because if 1945 was destroyed by the monsters, how does 1985 exist, right?
Right.
And that's where you're like, and there's something about this fun trick they play of all the different time zones are moving at the same time, right? So it's like, you can either, for a while, think that's like, that's weird time travel rules about how the time travel works, is all the time zones are synced up, where it's like, but that's weird. That's a weird conception of time travel. It makes a lot more sense. It's like, no, this is just all happening at the same time. They're just in different places.
It's just travel, not time travel.
Yeah, you're literally just teleporting to other places. You're not traveling through time.
Yes. I will say, in the big confusing stretch of the game, which is most of it, the thing that by far created the most like twist points and points of confusion and like trying to figure it out and takes the longest to unravel, I think intentionally, is the sheer number of doppelgangers going on. Because every character has at least one in terms of their like future 2188 self.
Yes.
And those are doled out pretty slowly over time. Like, I think the first character you get who like totally has one of those is it Miura?
It's Miura and Natsumi have the first one, where it's like them and their astronauts or whatever. You're like, what the fuck is happening?
That was one of the biggest what the fucks for me.
Because I think that's his first scene opens with that. And and that's like one of the, because when you're talking about like narrative perspective, those are the only scenes where they have a couple of them that don't have an official, like a literal narrative perspective, where you as the player are just given the scene more or less out of context of, here's like astronaut people in 2188, which is past any of the time zones that the game takes place in. And, like,
and you have Miura talking about like, I'm fascinated in the Pacific War period.
Yes, and you're like, is this the future of these characters? Like, does eventually, do they grow, like, end up in 2188 and they like lose their memory? Is it like a past life? Like, what the fuck is going on?
So you have at least those doppelgangers, but most characters have more. Juro has like 7. Juro has like...
Judo's the most complicated one because he has a doppelganger within the same loop. Because it's both, you have Izumi Judo, who loses his memory and then becomes Kurabe Judo. And then you have one of him that is killed by his past self. And then you have the original 427 Judo. And yes, he's the one that is by far the most layered.
Yes. But, you know, then you have like Tomi Kisaragi, who is also the idol who is like singing and talking to Shu Amaguchi. And Shu Amaguchi in his dreams has this guy named Tetsuya Ida. And Tetsuya Ida is playing with a robot of Tomi Kisaragi. But and then
there's also a dude named Tetsuya Ida in this timeline who's like doing weird shit.
And the robot has Toby's memories for a little bit, but most of the time you see her is actually 427 again, and is Izumi. And so it's just this absolutely complicated web of, and then, oh my god, I mean, Chihiro. Morimura. Morimura Sensei has so many that, like, you're cued into it a little bit in that the voice actress, I don't know how they did this in the dub, but in the original Japanese, they keep it where Iori Fuyusaka has the same voice as all the Morimuras. And that one is pretty oblique for a while, but there are just Chihiros everywhere.
Yeah. And it's that thing where you think you have little girl Chihiro, who's Miura's sister, who you think is a different one, but it's actually the original one from 2188 who saved her memories and then planted it in
Which is one of the last twists you get, because that's in the... Renya Goto is the one character they really save for the end.
Yes.
Because he knows the most. He's like a detective, basically. and has put this together. And most of his story is just like he's doing the Sherlock Holmes moment of like, Watson, I'm going to put all this together.
Yes, he's the man who's been walking around with a fucking notebook the whole game, and you play one scene of him early on. If you were like me, I played his scene as soon as I unlocked it.
Yep,
I was like,
me too.
What the fuck is going on with this dude? Because he's so sketchy and weird, and he's voiced by Fukuyama Jun. He's a voice actor I like, who's like playing him as this like very deep voiced, like mysterious character.
I assumed he was a bad guy.
Yeah, it's like, you see the antagonist of the game. It's like, what's going on with this dude? Did you get one story mission with him, and then he's locked behind? Now you have to get like every character up to 80% before you can see more of them. It's like, oh fuck.
So basically how I did it was I finished everyone else's, and then there's one scene of Hijiyama who is blocked until you finish Renya, and then Hijiyama's last scene is sort of the last scene of the main loop. But man, it is fascinating, and that sheer number of doppelgangers, plus all the like different organizations going on, that you've got sort of Tetsuya Ida's faction, you've got Monimura's faction. Sometimes they're aligned, sometimes they're not. You've got 427 doing whatever the fuck he's doing.
Yeah.
Who in some ways is actually kind of the hero of the game.
Yes.
But is played as the antagonist for a lot of it. But it's because he has more of the info than we do. It's so weird.
Yeah, and that's, I think, one of my favorite things, thinking about perspective in like that whole aspect of the game. One of my favorite parts about it is the process the player goes through of early on, there are a bunch of characters that seem like this is a character that knows a lot about what's happening here. One's like Ryoko or Morimura Sensei, that you're like, man, these characters really have access to like more information. And then for most of them, once you hit a certain point in the game, you realize this character doesn't know anything.
Yeah.
Like Ryoko's like it seems like, because it's basically any of the characters that like have survived from previous loops, you're like, they must know a lot about what's happening in the world. And then you're like, no, these people know jack shit. Like, I understand way more about about the world they're living in than they do. And that shift I find so fascinating, where there's all those characters that are like, here's this like fascinating, mysterious character that must know what's really happening. And it's like, they don't know anything. Like, because they are all operating on like anyone who thinks that time travel is happening is like, they are in like a totally different world than what is actually going on in the game.
Yeah, like someone like Natsuno winds up learning way more about the fundamentals of this world by accident than any of the other people who are like trying to figure it out.
Yeah, and who are acting like, oh, we know so much more because we're mysterious and we know about the time travel and all that. It's like, you don't know jack shit.
Like, Tetsuya Ida is a great example of that, is this character who really presents himself as all-knowing, and he's kind of the opposite in the end.
He's like the one in many ways that like plays the most into and has the most faith in the like artificial reality that they are living in. Is trying to like use it to his advantage without understanding like what's the actual mechanics of what's occurring here.
Yeah. And, you know, along the way, in all of this, it's so easy to, like, get swept up in the narrative sort of puzzle pieces of it, that there's so much thematic work going on.
Yeah.
In all of the different things they're drawing upon. It becomes a very self-reflexive piece about, like, just game design and ideas about that in a lot of the Juro Izumi stuff and what he's planning on, and you realize, like, oh, the weird little RTS minigame we're playing, it's because he designed it as a weird little RTS minigame, and that's how it all works. And, like, so there's, and just a lot of, like, actual deconstruction of the mecha genre in a way people like to say about Neon Genesis Evangelion, but really Mobile Suit Gundam did it, and this feels like this is actually taking a step further in doing other kinds of deconstruction of anime genres. There's a lot.
There's a lot. I think where I want to go is I want to talk about, hit on something that I talked about in my Game of the Year thing with this game, which is that one of my favorite parts about what the game is that it's an apocalyptic piece of fiction. But it's maybe one of, if not like, it might be like my most favorite like apocalyptic piece of fiction, meaning like a piece of fiction that is dramatizing the apocalypse as it is occurring, right? And it's that the like game's multiple conceptions of what the apocalypse is are so suggestive to me. One of which being, I adore the notion of the apocalypse marching backwards through time. That it's like it happens at some distant point in the future and is going backwards through time and destroying mankind's future. And that like, I love that like humanity's last stand takes place in 1985 in the mid 80s. That's like, there's a time zone that is like 2025, which is basically the present for us, and it's gone. Like there's this notion I feel like the game like sort of suggests of like we've already lost. Like, us in the real world in 2020, we're fucked because we are not the last line anymore. It's too far. We are destroyed. Like, our reality is destroyed. The 80s is the turning point, right? That is like the hinge, which for Japan's history is suggestive of like the bubble economy, the bubble bursting, causing the lost decade, all that kind of stuff. Got a lot of stuff that I talked about on the Yakuza Kiwami episode of the podcast forever ago whenever I played that game, because that game is also dealing with similar themes around the 80s and the bubble bursting and all of what happens with the like Japan's economy and like the criminal section and stuff like that then. But then for the rest of the world, broadly speaking, like America and the UK in particular, the 80s is such an inflective point for us with Reagan, for the UK with Thatcher. It is like, looking back on it in 2020, it does feel like that is like the hinge. That is where like, if things had gone differently and like politics had worked out differently, we might be living in a world that is not ruled by like 2 mega corporations and is not where like pollution is like past the point probably where humanity can do anything reasonable to have a long span on this planet, versus like we can protract it for a little bit longer, but like most of those things, broadly speaking, are kind of like past the point of no return, and it's about triage and minimizing the damage that we have done. And when you look back at like the 80s, like that really does feel like that political moment, and the way that I think it's made me think a lot about how we represent the 80s as the like one of like the last stands of nostalgia, that it feels like we are starting to get more like 90s and early 2000s nostalgia stuff is being made, but like we don't make 50s nostalgia stuff anymore, but we sure do make a shit ton of 80s nostalgia.
Yeah, I mean, we make a little bit of 90s by like pulling fucking teeth.
Yeah.
But it is so hard to get anyone to not focus on the fucking 80s. And this is a rant I know I have done on this podcast before in the American context of like the just slobbering, gross, slack-jawed, the 80s were perfect and wonderful and amazing. And I fucking hate it. And one of the reasons I hate it is, I mean, one, it's just omnipresent and no one has anything interesting to say about it. But two, it's all you regurgitating something you were sold as a kid. Like a picture of like, the 80s weren't like that. The 80s weren't idyllic. The 80s were this point where we fucked everything up. Reagan wasn't a good president. No. Reagan wasn't like this great charismatic leader. He fucked this country harder than any politician in anyone alive's lifetimes. Yeah. Including Donald Trump, because Trump doesn't happen without
Reagan.
that.
Yeah, it's like it sets it, like Reagan, his administration, and the policies they put in place, like both domestic and foreign. Country. Yeah, broke this country. It's like
you can trace income inequality, and you can trace so many just forms of bigotry that are unleashed, and you can trace global warming and just so many fucking problems.
Yeah, and a lot of like some of the more like heinous stuff we do in the Cold War. Yeah. And setting ourselves up for 9/11 eventually. Like that shit starts happening in Reagan's administration.
Like, you know, I think one of the most instructive examples that people don't know is Jimmy Carter, who by no means was a perfect president. But one of his projects was he installed a bunch of solar panels on the roof of the White House. Jimmy Carter was a guy who knew about global warming in the 70s. Yeah. And he's talking about these things, and he puts solar panels on the White House. What a cool idea to like be a leader of like, you know, this doesn't solve anything, but it's the symbolic powers of the president that are really important,
and
right?
But like the most important powers of a president, which is the symbol of what the administration stands for. Yeah.
Yes. And then Reagan on day one had them pulled down and ripped them off the White House. And, like, I feel like that's one of those things of, like, does that alone mean anything? Well, no. Pulling the solar panels off the White House didn't save anything and it didn't hurt anything. But symbolically, it is this, like, massive inflection point. Yeah. And so the 80s are something we really should be critically interrogating, not mindlessly slack-jawed celebrating. And that is what so much of our media is. And there is something super refreshing about 13 Sentinels that is viewing the 80s. And part of it is that it does not view the 80s as nostalgia strictly. It views it as, like, present. Yeah. Because it is the present for these characters. It's not like Stranger Things or something, where I feel like the characters are weirdly aware that they are in the 80s from a 2000s perspective.
Well, like specifically George Kamitani, who's the main writer and like the head of Vanillaware, you know, because I read it because I read a bunch of interviews and stuff because I was just so fascinated with the game, and for him, like I think he just says like, well, like the main reason I said in 1985 is like, I mean, I just because he grew up then, he knew the time period really well. It's like, well, I know what to do with like what technology is there, like what media would have been available, like how did teenagers talk in the 80s, all that kind of stuff. It's like that was when I was that age, so that's when he said it. And it's like one of the prime motivators. So it's like an actual lived experience as opposed to, as you say, Stranger Things, where the McDuffie brothers, like the leads on that show, were not alive. They had not been born yet when that show takes place.
Yeah, I mean, it's a reconstruction of the 80s from movies.
Yeah.
It is not about the 80s. It's about 80s movies, which is a different thing. And this is like, this game does not get overtly political in any of these senses, but that is really there and I think just something about asking you to view the 80s as like a present moment where things could be done. Yeah, where like this is where either the apocalypse happens or it's averted is in 1985. Yeah, and that is a really interesting point of view on things. Yeah, and it's an intervention historically. Yeah, it's just that thing, and it's like one of the things about the game I love is that I have no idea if that's a thing that Kamitani and his team consciously wanted to put into the game as like a theme or whatever, because I think there's something about what the game is doing that it feels Lynchian in many ways to me, in that sense of like it is not about giving you a message, it's about giving you evocative symbols and ideas and letting you do with that what you will. And that's like one of the things I focus on is like, I have no idea if that's like was a thing on purpose or like the 80s is when this fucking is going down. But it feels like it is a thing that the game is giving you this idea, it's giving you this symbol, this suggestion that's like the rest of history, like the one historical point we have in World War II is destroyed because, in the game, literally the kaiju come. Also the kaiju come like months before we would have bombed Japan and like destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So I feel like the kaiju in the past are like representative in many ways of the nuclear bombs. But then it's like any point in the future also is destroyed. There's like, this is it. Like everyone has come, future people and past people have assembled here in 1985 to avert this crisis. Also the crisis that is made by the people in the future. That is like, I think that is another like thing is like the people in the future / the past, right? Because it is literally like in the distant past that have set up this scenario that have like created the apocalypse. That's very suggestive to me. Because there's so many layers to this because it's not really 1985 or any of these periods. It's all this simulation, and there's the apocalypse within the simulation world, which is all the kaiju stuff. And then there is the actual apocalypse that happened to humanity in the distant past that is our distant future. Yes. That is when the game takes place, it happened like literally millions of years ago because that's like part of that revelation of, oh shit, like we have been on a spaceship traveling at near the speed of light to try to reach other planets in other galaxies. It's like that takes a long fucking time to do. Yeah. So it's like humanity, it has that very like Nier Automata feel of, oh, humanity's gone. Like the human race is over. And that's where it is. It's that sense of like, oh, like it's just like there's nothing left. There's no like saving humanity or saving like the past or anything like that. It's like, well, we just have to like do the best with what we have and like try to build something new. But humanity has fucked itself completely already way before this game takes place. Yeah, and in the specific, like, techno gobbledygook explanation, it's something with nanomachines and all that. But it's almost presented in a sense of it doesn't matter. If it wasn't the nanomachines, it would be something else. Humans did something stupid and fucked themselves. The Earth provided plenty, and we destroyed it. Yeah. Which we're doing. So yeah, and I think that whole framing also adds something to... Because there are nostalgic elements, obviously. I mean, the entire framing of kaiju through a Godzilla clone sort of thing, what they call Daimos, and all of this stuff is definitely a call to certain kinds of nostalgia. Certainly and all this stuff with VHS and everything, certainly for people in Japan and who lived through the 80s, all of that is nostalgic. But it is a different kind of nostalgia where it's like these are the last hopes and dreams of a dying race sending itself off into the future, and explicitly with the intention of don't bask in this nostalgia and live there, but learn something from it and then start something new.
Yes.
Is the idea of the game.
Yeah,
And
because the literal reason why you have the different time zones, because I think this is also part of like where the sense of like the 80s is the last stand is like they set up this like we're trying to create this simulation to figure out what is the point where we could avert it, right? Like at what point was human technology and society and politics at such an advanced point that what happened was inevitable. Like, was it in the 2080 whatever? Was it in 2020 whatever? Was it in the 1980s? Was it in World War II? Like, what point were we set on this path? And how far back do we have to go to try to avert this, like, fate that we have found ourselves in?
Yeah.
Which I find another fascinating idea of, like, it's a social experiment to figure out when did it happen? Like, when was the point of no return for the human race?
Yeah, absolutely. But, you know, everything we're saying here and that key point of 1985, because even if in the end you find out it's an illusion, it is effectively what your view is for most of the game. I just hold this up next to, like, Stranger Things and It, and just name your fucking recent 80s nostalgia masturbatory piece. Yeah. And it's like,
that
is
Ghostbusters movie that we got the trailer for, and then I think it's never going to happen maybe because of COVID. I feel like that it just like disappeared for like a year.
Yeah, it's one of the mini movies that just got pushed like a full year. It's done. It exists. Sadly, it's going to come out. That movie I've already written that into an academic paper about how angry I am about it because it's so fucking insulting. But yeah, this is like the antidote to all of that. It is like the critically thoughtful, while also fun and entertaining, critical antidote to all of that.
Yeah, because like the whole time, you know, because every character has some moment where they realize like the reality they are living in is fucked and it's like wrong. Yeah. And it comes into different forms with different characters. Like the main one being Judo, because he's like, if you have to pick the like main characters of the game, it's clearly Judo and Fuyusaka, or like in a like self-reflective way of like, here's like the boy girl like protagonists of the mecha thing, and it's like the kind of, and like Fuyusaka is crafted as a shoujo like protagonist. Judo is crafted as the Amuro, right? He's like the young boy who gets into the mech when he doesn't want to and has to like face his destiny, all that kind of stuff. And it's like Judo, I love that he's the one that in many ways like has the most like what he is living is wrong. It's off, and he doesn't know why. Like his was like one of my favorite stories, and I like, because I think they kind of center him as this sort of protagonist-esque figure, I like stuck to his story kind of the most. Of when I unlocked his, I was like, I'm gonna go back and see what's going on with him, and that constant sense of like because he himself has this weird like nostalgia for all the movies and things he's watching that aren't real. It's like the world he's living in isn't real. His best friend isn't real. Everything that he's like, this life he thinks he's leading has been manufactured, and it's like been manufactured in different ways by different people, by like Morimoto Sensei, by 427 / his friend who's in his consciousness. And it's like he is living this fake reality for him that is driven by media and nostalgia and like B movies and sci-fi and bullshit like that. Like he's like the stand-in for the audience in that way, right?
Yeah, because everything you just described is like good. That resonates too much, Sean. That's a scary way when you distill it to like that. Of like, yeah, we all feel a little like that right now.
Yeah, that the only way that you can emotionally process your own lived experiences is filtered through media is literally what Judo's life is, right? That's like the only way he can accept these, what are his memories. They are the memories of him when he was the pilot that fought in like in the 2020s or whatever, and stayed in there for like 8 hours, or like, I love that you never really see that fight. You just get this like, fucking Izumi Judo was a fucking badass, because it's like he on his own fought for like 8 hours in this thing until he literally destroyed his mind for this girl he loves, and that the only way he can like process that trauma is just through like filtered through media like Godzilla and shit like that.
Yeah. And it's funny when you talk about like different ways of playing it. I did his first couple of like levels, however you want to say it, sections, and then I wound up doing a bunch of other people's stuff because I was still kind of figuring out how the game was like played, and like, you know, because I haven't played like as many visual novels as you, and one of the main things it borrows is like the kind of mapping structure. But anyway, so I was going off and doing other people's stuff. So like it was kind of a mid to late game revelation for me of his best friend being an illusion, which unlocks like so many different things if you play it that way. And that was one of the bigger mind fucks of like, oh, Oh, he's been talking to himself. Oh.
Yeah.
And you do get a bunch of that, hints of that in other people's stories of like, man, that Juro boy, he's nice, but he's fucking weird.
I love that with, like, Kisaragi is the main character that does that all the time, both in Judo's story and, like, other times you see her. It's just like, what is with this weird kid? Like, he's just this weirdo who's, like, very quiet. He sort of sits in the corner, and he's just, like, kind of mumbling to himself all the time, and he always goes to fucking Amaguchi's house.
Yeah, because the friend in his head is convincing him they need to go, like, mooch off this kid who has a nice TV.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's weird.
It's very, and like that character specifically, the fake friend, is one of my favorites because it's like that's where the game uses its tropes most effectively, where he is like the tropiest fucking character of like the classmate best friend, who's like always joking, and it's the Yosuke from Persona 4 or the Ryuji from Persona 5, right? Or specifically in like the tradition of visual novels, that's the character that like it goes back to. Tokimeki Memorial, which is like one of like the like granddaddies of the visual novel genre, specifically like the dating sim sort of side of it, which is sort of like the spine of most visual novels, and is like this character archetype for a game where it's like, oh, here's all the different like female characters your main character can date, and you ask this like dumb friend in the classroom who sucks, like, oh, like what's like my like compatibility with her or whatever, and he like gives you like this like, oh, she's blah, 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 she likes you or whatever. It's that kind of character archetype, and that character always sucks. He's always just like, man, fuck this guy. And I like that they like use that to like both make you suspicious of him and also kind of like dismiss him at the same time.
Yep.
It's like, because you're supposed to always be like, there's something just off about that character and everything. They're always just like a little bit too sleazy. They're just a little bit too like sexist and gross. And it's like his jokes are like only 50% funny, but he's in every fucking scene all the time because he like serves this function for the game and the storytelling. And the fact that he never pops up in anyone else's story also is like the thing is like where like alarm bells start going off, like what the fuck is with this dude? And I just think it's like that side of it is handled so well.
Oh, so well. And like Persona 4, we talked about this many times, that like they do a really good job critically interrogating that idea with Yosuke. Like Yosuke is very much a deconstruction of that type.
Yeah, because that's what he is at the beginning of the game, and that's like part of his character arc is trying to sort of like unlearn that and learn to be like a better like human being and not this like weird jokey classmate dude who has like no real identity for himself.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure if Ryuji really matches that in like Persona 5. Because
like I think he's set up broadly as that archetype, and then he very much goes in a different direction. Yeah,
but so like my point is we've seen other. This isn't like the first game that's ever played with that archetype, but it goes to this extreme of he is literally a cancer on the dude's mind, who is a foreign like invading figment of his imagination, who is compelling him in a like bad direction. Yeah, although we learn he has some like good qualities, but like it's Juro Izumi should have gone around all of this a little better.
Yeah, like when you think about it that way, it is like one of like the best like metaphors for like the ways that high school like male relationships in high school can create that like the toxic masculinity concept of like Judo's such a nice kid. He's just like this nice nerdy little kid who's very soft spoken, and it's like he's just not trying to be mean to anyone, and he's just got that one friend who's an asshole, and that the only reason that Judo's a friend with him is because Judo's too nice. And the only reason the asshole is a friend with Judo is because he can like get Judo to do whatever he wants him to do, right? And it's just like you see that dynamic, and it's like a classic like socializing behavior of men in high school, and it's like you see it as like, I mean, I literally see it as a teacher now and be like, I really wish you weren't friends. It's like it's like making both of them works, like is how it happens in real life. But here, from like Judo's perspective, it is this thing where it's like, it is literally a corrupting influence in his mind. That it's like something he's like internalized and has to try to expel from his brain.
Yeah, watch this tape.
Yeah,
watch this tape.
Yeah, just watch this tape. I promise it's going to be really funny. And it's like it's just like it's really cool. Just don't tell your parents about it though.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like the next thing you need is like they need a scene where like fucking he gets Judo to smoke weed, and it's like that's like the American version of it.
Yes. I think smoking weed would probably be healthier than what he's actually doing to Juro. Juro could probably use some weed. Calm down a little bit. So where do we want to go next? I mean, do we want to just go through some of the different character stories in here?
Yeah, because I think we just talked a lot about Judo's.
The next one would be Iori.
Yeah, Fuyusaka. So hers is she's the shoujo protagonist, right? Like it's And one thing I love about her story is how you have her story and you have Sekigahara's story. And it's like, I feel that they're like, because Sekigahara shows up in Iori's story all the time because he is the mysterious male love interest figure that hops in, again, very like...
She has a dramatic love confession on the back of a motorcycle while they're riding through town at sunset.
Yes, and I mean, like, it's so much so that in the prologue, Iori is running to school with a piece of bread in her mouth going like, I'm late, which is like the trope that's such a trope that, like, it's that thing where, like, is there anything that actually did this earnestly, or is it just like a totally... because it's like... Because I've periodically tried to do research into it, because it is an omnipresent trope to indicate the, like, old school shoujo romance, like, protagonist who, like, wakes up and it's kind of a ditz and is running to school with bread in her mouth and goes like, I'm late, and then she crashes headfirst into her love interest and they argue and whatever. I mean, it's literally, like, it's such a trope that we've talked about it before on the Evangelion episode, because Evangelion uses that trope in its last couple of episodes to, like, create its, like, fake school like romantic comedy version of the show.
You'd have to go back to, like, early Tezuka manga that like was predates it and like was then an inspiration for shoujo writers 10 years later.
Yeah,
I feel like that's where you'd have to start looking.
Yeah, because it's just because there are like a couple of shows that people look at. It's like, I think this is one of the first ones that did this, but they always, and maybe it's just because it's such a trope that even when I go back and would look at those scenes on YouTube, of like, it still feels ironic to me. Like, it's like it never has felt like an earnest version of that trope. But they do that here, and she runs into Sekigahara, and it's the whole, like, oh my god, it's like this weird, mysterious boy. Like, does he go to our school? Does he not? He's got a motorcycle because he's super cool.
The starting point for all her events is then hanging out with her two girlfriends, having
it's
food.
So good. That's my favorite, like structure for any of the characters, is that it's always like, here's like a 5-minute sequence of the three girls hanging out after school trying to figure out what they're going to go eat.
And then like talking about boys a little bit and like schoolwork and just
Well, because it's like you've got the one girl, Miyako, who I love her so much.
She's so good.
She's like the best non-playable character of the game, and like she's the one who's like obsessed with the idea of romance rather than like actually wanting to fall in love. She's the one who probably like reads a bunch of shoujo manga and shit like that. Yeah. You've got Tomi, who doesn't give a fuck. Like, she doesn't care.
Partially because she's from the future.
Yeah, she's from the future, and it's like she just has her own shit. She doesn't really care. Like, if she eventually obviously gets paired off with Ninji, which is one of my favorite pairings. But it's like a very and we kind of like each other, and they eventually start dating. And then Iori is the one who's like, she's actually like going to be like really in a romantic relationship, but doesn't like talking about it. And so I love that like dynamic of those three girls and them eating like ridiculously giant hot dogs. And how good the fucking like hot dog sprites and shit look like in this game.
They're so good, and like there's just like weirdly detailed conversations about all the food. Like, this has chili sauce on it. This is hot. It's like, no, it's their speciality, and like they go through a bunch, and it's like, I don't know if I like it though.
It's like if this was the 2020s, fucking Tomi would suggest making like a gourmet YouTube channel or something for them to do their food reviews on.
They'd be doing some ridiculous stunt with the food.
Yeah, food reviews with Miwa-chan.
It did, I will say, some of that did very much make me want to go back to Japan and have some snacks, because when I saw them like eating crepes, which if you don't know in Japan are like dessert food, and they're the best dessert I've ever had in my entire life, was in a small town at one of their shrines. There was a New Year's festival, and they had the dude making dessert crepes, and I had the double chocolate crepe, and it is the best thing I've ever put in my mouth. Oh my god. And that made me very hungry. The like fucking ice cream cones they have, all of that stuff is like, it's also just like very true to like, these are the things these girls would be going and eating after school, weirdly. So it's so good. But yes, Iori, and Iori's is interesting because she intersects with so many others, and some characters are fairly contained to their own story, and some of them like are kind of everywhere. Iori is one that's kind of everywhere. Jiro is one that's kind of everywhere. But I like how it intersects with Sekigahara also, because you have to go a little while in Sekigahara's to realize hers happens before Sekigahara loses his memory. Yeah. That's like the placement of things is such a mindfuck too.
Yeah, because that's one of those things where like, because he just comes across so differently in Fuyasaka's scenes, and you're like, is this because before he's lost his memory? Is this because like, is it later? Like, what is going on with these characters? Yeah, I love that dynamic, and then it's one of those things where I think the approach of the game to have like a lot of the like there it feels like moments of character development basically happen off screen, but I think it works really effectively. Of like the way the romances develop feels natural because of like the character pairings, but you don't but I think like the game gets away with not actually spending a lot of time with like Iori and A like spending time or having like a big romantic date as a big episode or whatever that's like 10 minutes long. I think there's something suggestive about the way it's used as romance. And in that, with Iori specifically, I like that the game has this like interesting attitude of what like is and isn't this like fated, destined romance, right? Because there are like some pairings that remain true from their original identities, like Miura and Natsuno, and some that are completely and utterly different, or with specifically Judo and Iori / Chihiro Morimura. It is like both, right? It's like you have those romances layered of, you have the 3 loops ago, Izumi Judo and Chihiro Morimura, and they are paired up and like they like get back together at the very end of the game. It's like basically the last moment. But then you also have, with these versions of the characters, there's like no romantic connection between them at all. And it's misleading because you feel like it's setting that up and you're like, oh, it's going to be Judo and Iori are going to get paired up. And like for a large, like huge section of the game, I was like, eventually that's going to happen. It has to happen, right? Like eventually these two characters have to be together. Then it's like, well, no, they don't. Of course they don't. Like,
because they're different people. And
yeah,
that's like part of the
people.
point, is that like Iori Fuyusaka isn't Chihiro Morimura.
Yeah,
actually.
Just because she's like a clone or whatever, her lived experiences are different. Like she's lived, like she's the only one of them that has lived in the 80s, because that Chihiro's supposed to be from the 2080s or whatever, right? She's supposed to be from the furthest timeline, and they took her in this loop back to the 80s. So she's lived a totally different life than any of the other Chihiro Morimuras in the simulation have ever had. And so it's like, of course, like eventually that leads her down a totally different path in her life. That leads her into this relationship with Sekigahara, which is like, based on their original people, is the least likely of all relationships, because Sekigahara is the assassin that was hired to murder her in the original timeline.
Yes.
So it's I like the way the game plays with that, of that it's you know, I think the game gets to have its cake and eat it too, in that sense of like, it gets to have a couple of these like nice sort of fated relationships that feel like these are two characters that are so perfect together, they're always going to be together. And for some of them, it's like, no, like people's lived experiences change who they are, change the encounters they have and the kind of relationships that they have. And I like that. I think it's most definitive by giving the shoujo protagonist character that one. That's like, hers is the one that is like the most like, this is not a destined romance at all.
Like to the point where she seems weirdly aware of how like off it is. Yeah. Like when she's confessing to him, she's like, I don't really understand any of this. It's not like I'm playing by a book I don't get. Mm-hmm. And it's very much brought to the fore.
Yeah. And it just makes her feel like she is so, more so than any of the other like alter egos of the different characters, she feels the most like this is her own person, totally separate from all the other Chihiro Morimuras that have ever existed.
Which, I mean, we haven't talked a ton about the voice acting. It's all phenomenal.
Oh, yeah.
But I do think, like, if there's maybe an MVP, the woman who does all of the Chihiros and Iori, and that level of differentiation while also, like, giving you these, even if you're not, like, consciously aware that must be the same actress, it just triggers something in your mind subconsciously. It's a really good multi-layered performance.
Yes, that again, she has to play like 4 or 5 different versions of herself.
It's really funny when you get to the credits and it's like listing everyone and it's like Iori Fuyusaka / Chihiro Morimura, like parentheses first version / Chihiro Morimura parentheses like special agent lady.
Yeah, it's like 3 loops ago, 2 loops ago, like 1 loop ago. This one, like this one is a little girl, and then also the original one, who's like was like 80 years old or something. It's like old woman version. Yeah,
it's quite impressive.
Yeah,
So I mean, let's just jump around freely. We talked about Ai Sekigahara. Ai Sekigahara has quite the crazy arc. His is one of the best like opening stingers.
He's got like such a sick hook where he wakes up next to Morimura, who is dead. And it's like that, and that's another one of those that's like hanging over so much of the game, where she's such an important character as the school nurse, who seems like she knows everything, but like the whole time you're like, well, eventually she gets fucking murdered. I don't know if it's by Sekigahara or someone else. Eventually this character's dead. Like, how does that work? Like, what happens with that?
And because of the way they order the prologues, that's a piece of information given to you really early.
Yes, you play the entire game basically knowing that eventually this version of this character is going to be killed.
Yeah, which also tells you Sekigahara's has to be one of the last events.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, he's got this. He's got a fucking note with numbers on it and a key. And it's like, what the hell am I supposed to do? It's great. And his is just a fun, it's almost like a spy story at points.
Yes.
He also, this is one of the great pieces of misdirection in terms of giving you like different theories of what's going on, is that in that first scene when he gets like the, when Yuki comes over and like gives him the box and like shows him the projection, it's like, you are I from a different world. And it introduces this idea of like parallel realities.
Yes.
And so I thought there was some kind of parallel dimension stuff going on for a long time because of that. The game really likes to fuck with you here.
Yeah, and he's like his whole weird spy like intrigue and all that stuff. And yeah, it's one of the ones that fucks with you a lot because also the other piece of big misdirection it does is that for most of the game, again, depending on how you play it, he is the one who is set up to be 427, right? Like there's this sense that you get, like especially if you do a lot of Ryoko stuff early on, you are set up to believe that Sekigahara before he lost his memory was like an antagonist type figure, and he has now lost his memory, and it's like they set all those seeds for you, and I love that of like sort of trying to unravel. Like, is he not? Like, again, like, depending on when you get that scene where you find out he's an assassin, can play into that as well. Yeah.
Although, I will say, the order I played it in, I never really thought he was 427, because I did most of the Ryoko stuff at the very end. She was the last full protagonist.
I did hers pretty early on.
Okay. Yeah, because this speaks to how well the game can work in any order, because that didn't take any intrigue out of, because then like the focus for me on Ryoko's was, I know she's wrong because I've finished Sekigahara's. He's definitely not that guy. And so now it's like, what is going on with Ryoko? And Ryoko's becomes much more, it's this either way, but like it was really centered on the, what is fucked up in her mind. And like, I felt really bad for her. Like hers was like a really intense one to do late in the game because it is she is so out of it.
Yeah, and she has like the most tragic story of any of the characters because her like personality is effectively lost. Like you're seeing what happened to that Izumi Judo who lost his identity and became Kurabe. Like happen in real time with that character as you're playing as her. Yeah. And that was like one of those things that when that didn't ever like get reversed, and it's like, no, like that, her personality and like memories that she had are gone. It's like now she's like, you know, she's still a person and she's alive and all that stuff, and she can build new experiences, new relationships and all of that. But like all those things that were lost are lost, and that is like something that the game holds true through to its complete ending, which is very tragic.
Yeah, it's not too fun for her. I mean, do you want to anything else to say about Ryoko's story while we're on that one? I mean, just because we jumped to it, it is like that one has all the stuff where you're having to like get out your menu and take the pills and keep doing that, and like the loop, like that one plays really heavily with this one in Nenji's play the most with the idea of like a recurring loop within the loop of like the basic gameplay. Nenji's is literally he keeps getting sent back, but Ryoko's it's like, she and you are a little uncertain. Is this something that's happening every day? Is this like...
Yeah, it is. It's that thing where... Because it was like at the very beginning of the game playing as Judo that like I was not sure at first when I started his thing. I played, one chapter as him and I started up again. And then he's back in the same classroom and the same kind of events are happening again. I'm like... Did the things I played happen? Because that's a very visual novel type concept is here you play through one route, now go back to the beginning and play through again, but like all those experiences are just sort of like lost for the characters. They never experienced it. It's just something that you remember that informs you're playing the game.
And that's what I assumed was going on, and that's why I actually didn't do a bunch of Juros right at the start, because I was like, I want to go see new stuff. But I was wrong. That's not how it works.
Yeah, and it's becomes for some of those characters, like for Judo and Iori, who have like their daily school routines, it becomes a device for the game to comment on like their daily routines and habits. That's like, like every day after school, like you have the same dumb conversations, the same like people are filtering out of the class, like the same things basically happen. And so it's like your daily routine creates effectively like a loop in your life. And then like everyone's loop then starts to slowly kind of unravel as like their story becomes more intense. But then you have Yoko, who it's the most unsure because the character is unsure like, are these things happening? How much of this is she forgetting? How much is she remembering? And then Ninji's is the one where it's like, no, it's like literally Groundhog Day loop style.
Yeah, but Ryoko's is fucking tragic in that sense, and it's almost difficult to play through her points because she is so falling apart, and the art on her is so good. I love that, like, Ryoko's art model for, like, most of the game is she's just this, like, she's gnarly, fucked up, arm in a sling, the other arm, like, holding it, like, it's broken, and her, like, walking around, like, she has this, like, kind of limp walk animation. It is, it's comical at times, and then because I played her last, it went from this arc of, like, being comical to, like, hitting really hard.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting that you played hers last, just because, like, that was one of the ones that... Because they do gate hers a lot, because I think she's designed to be one of the later game ones, because she's tied into a lot of those ideas. But, like, yeah, since I did one of her first ones, basically, as soon as I could, and got really hooked on it, like, what the fuck is going on? Because that's the one where you have, like, one of, I think, like, the most what the fuck moments is when you realize that she shot and killed Tetsuya Ida.
Yes.
And you never, like, play that moment, really. Like, it's, like, one of those things that's, like, lost in weird flashbacks and things that you're not sure, did that happen? When did this happen? What the fuck? That she just, like, fucking shot that dude. Good for her.
Yes.
Fuck him.
Yeah. He's the closest we have to, like, a straight-up bad guy, I would say. But, yeah, okay. Ryoko's is great. We mentioned Nenji's. Nenji's... Nenji's is one that, like, when it started for me, through, like, whatever little understanding I felt I was gaining about things, into such question of, like, this isn't happening for anyone else. He's in a Groundhog Day loop. He's being sent back by someone. And it's like, and you realize the more you play that this is actually all completely diegetic within the world we're already in, because it's something that...
Okino
is doing to him. But, like, at first it is such a, like, to the point where I did his first one and then put it off for a while because I'm like, this is messing with my head too much. And by the time I went back in, I had done the event where Okino, like, fucks with Juro's head. So I had once he realizes it's Okino, I'm like, I think I know what's going on. But it's wild.
Yeah, no, his is great. I love every time you go all the way to the left of the screen and fight, I forget his name is, but the other delinquent dude, that then set it up that was one of, you have the whole, like, credit scene, basically, where the characters go back into the simulation that they have recreated and everything, and they go and see all their, like, high school friends, like Miyako and everyone, and, like, the reunion that made me the most emotional was Ninji fucking, like, running into this delinquent dude for whom, like, no time has passed from his perspective, but Ninji's, like, 8 years older or something in the real world, and he's like, oh my god, like, this dude, we used to, like, get into all these dumb, like, brawls, back in the day. It's like, how are you doing, man? He's like, what is going on? Like, what is happening with you? It's like yesterday we beat each other up on the train station. I love that, because that's another, like, great classic anime trope character of the delinquent. That's very, if you've watched Yu Yu Hakusho, it's very Kuwabara, which is one of my favorite characters. It's like the heart of that show. And, like, Ninji is very much that, with his pompadour and his fucking attitude. But that he has a heart of gold under all of it. It's just, like, it's a character archetype I always really adore.
It's very good. It's very good. And just that train platform and having to, like, that was one that, when I did finally play it, I did it in, like, one big burst, which really helps, I think, of just doing this loop over and over and slowly unraveling it. And then also that's where a bunch of, like, development with Kisaragi comes in, even though... That's not really her, but it's like his realization of what he feels for her. Because for him, hasn't he already been to the future with her?
Yes. Yeah.
So, like, so all of that has happened. And
that's
so, like,
one of those things that, like, when I realized, all the Tomy stuff happens super early in the game. So it's like most of the time you see Ninji is after he actually knows what's happening, or that there is weird time travel shit happening, but he has no one to tell it to.
Same with Tomy. Like, they're just... they've been traumatized by this weird event in the future where they went with, like, the weird senpai who was passed out the entire time. No, that's great. And I really love all of his scenes with Tomy in this. Like, he has this one scene where he, like, asks her, like, what she wants out of life or something, and it like, or no, it's what would you do if you only had 3 minutes left to live? And it's a really beautiful scene. And then all the weird stuff that happens with the various people he gets on the train with. And he gets out of the simulation by following Okino, who wasn't careful enough, and coded this guy in. And Okino is one of my favorite characters in this game.
Yeah, he is like the secret 14th Sentinel.
Yes.
Yeah, that's one of the things, because I'm looking at the timeline here, one thing I love is early on in Ninji's storyline, you get the flashback he has to remembering that he was injected with nanomachines by Chihiro, like in the 70s.
Yeah.
Because this is another thing I love about the time travel in the game is like it's all set around the concept of generations, right? So it's like 40-year time gaps that 20 years elapse within them. So it's like really the 1985 stuff goes from like 1965 to 1985. So I love the idea of like, wait, there was like the 70s, even like every time period that isn't the time period you travel to feels like it doesn't exist. But of course it did. Like, of course, like fake 1970s existed in the simulation, and you just get little kid Ninja who's obsessed with like Kamen Rider type like Sentai shows. And he has his whole like, oh, it's the League of Darkness.
Yes.
And this weird spy lady who's from the League of Darkness came and fucking tried to inject me with some bullshit.
Yeah. Nenji's, I think, happens over the shortest period of time, right? Because it's like one day for him is his story. Mm-hmm. Because it's just that like recurring loop simulation, and then he gets out and beats the shit out of some guys.
Yeah.
Because they're assholes. Okay. From Nenji, why don't we talk about Tomi? Because hers is here. And Tomi's is also a fairly short period of time, because it's her adventure in the future where one day she and Nenji are just randomly zapped into, along with Miwako, are just randomly zapped into the future, and then they find weird, crippled senpai, Ryoko, who is just out for that entire adventure. And yeah, that was one that was, for whatever reason, I did several missions, and then kind of left it by the wayside, and came back to it, and I had seen all these other perspectives of realizing, like, oh, they must get out of this because they're in all the other stuff, and they remember it, and like, that's what made me like... And for whatever reason, I just hadn't gone back and done all of Tomi's stuff, and it was a really fascinating way to play the game.
I think I did a similar thing where it's like I played a couple of hers early on, and then did some other stuff, and then came back to it. And that's one of those ones where like when you know a lot more, it's like a lot of like the androids and all that kind of stuff makes way more sense when you come back to it later. Like, oh shit, right? Like they're like crazy androids from the future that are also going back because of fucking Ida and all that shit. Hers is, I think, one of like the most fun, like just contained on its own. I think it's one of like the most interesting stories because it's just you have like the interpersonal drama of the group, you've got the action of like fucking all this Terminator bullshit that's going on, like them going inside of one of the destroyed kaiju. It's like a really cool early moment. That like it just is like one of those where it's like it's really just sort of relishing in the minutia of what is happening with like the kaiju type apocalypse that's happening in the show or in the game, and not like bothering with like you don't get any like flashes to the distant future with like other versions of the character. Like, what the fuck is happening here? It's just like very like contained within the simulation.
Although you do get a pretty grand mind fuck of at the end.
Yeah.
They're in the saucer underground, and they get zapped back to the future or back to 1985. And then, which I guess is the past, but whatever. It's not either of those things, really.
Yeah, it's just a different place.
They go to the different place, and Miwako doesn't come with them. Mm-hmm. And then Tomi is like frantic, like, what the hell happened? But then Miwako is just there.
Yeah.
Because one of the things you talked earlier about, like, this game leaves a lot of moments off screen, and that's one of them. Is like, we don't see the scene where Miwako is back and Tomi reacts to that. This game uses ellipses everywhere.
Yeah.
But it's like a real freak out of like, we left her, she died with the Terminators, but she's here and she doesn't remember any of it. And she has to go back and try to figure this out. And then that's kind of where Tomi's story ends. And it's a mindfuck.
Yeah, that's like the big early clue, or like early to like mid-game clue of like there's like what is happening in like a Matrix type simulation. Yeah. Which is one of those things where it's like, it was a possibility I've been considering for a long time. And I was like, but that feels like that'd be fucking crazy, wouldn't it? Like, that is like, that'd be nuts. And then it's just like, oh no, yes, that is literally what is happening. Like, she's not a quote unquote real person. Although I think the game's argument is that it's like having a physical body doesn't make you real. It's your experiences and your memories and those things are what make you a person. But she is not based on a human like everyone else is.
Right. Which, and by the time I got there, I was into this must be a Matrix style thing, because some of these people are clearly real and some of them are not, with the caveats you just gave. And when you realize that about Miwako, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, because she's just such a nice, sweet girl. Like, she just wants to like I love every time Miwako pops up in someone else's story and she's just like hiding behind a tree, like staring at Rinya or something. And it's like, oh, it's Goto senpai.
Yes.
Like, she just like runs off screen. It's like, oh, there she is. Bye, Mio-chan.
Yep. So, can we talk about, there's so many. I was about to say my favorite one, but there's so many good ones. But I want to talk about Natsuno.
Okay, yeah.
Natsuno Minami, who has, I think, my favorite single, like, quest line in the game. Mm-hmm. and is such a funny character and such a vivid character, and just like she is basically the like 80s Spielberg protagonist version of this game, who like meets this fun alien and she's like the one obsessed with sci-fi, and she meets this fun alien and then goes on adventures. But there are so many like interlocking mysteries with that. This one obviously heavily interlocks, and you kind of have to play them together with Yuki's story. And Yuki is another one of my favorites because it's a detective story, and Yuki is such an awesome character, and she's her own like sort of stereotype and everything. But the way those two stories intersect is so great. And then of course, Yuki has the crazy mindfuck ending of fighting the robot 427. And like it jumps off the bridge, and you learn all about that, which then unlocks Natsuno's final scene, which is finding the Sentinel finally, and BJ kind of saying goodbye, and her losing her friend BJ. And it's very good. Both of those endings are so good.
Yeah, that final scene with BJ definitely like hits pretty hard because it is one of those where like you're not sure, and it's one of those another one of like the reunions in the credits that's like, oh, BJ got to come back too because he's also part of the simulation. All of that, the Nachan stuff is like top to down great. That's another, like, I just love the routine of going into the track room and seeing like what's going on with BJ. I remember getting to a moment where I was like trying to figure out, because I had finished like some character story, or I got like roadblocked. I was like, oh, I can do more Natsuno stuff. I went to Natsuno's and I like loaded it up. And it's the one where fucking Yoko is just like standing at her locker at the very beginning of the loop. I'm like, I think it was like 2 a.m. I'm like, I'm not going to have enough time to process this. Like, Ryoko and Natsuno, I didn't even know were two characters that knew each other fucking existed. I'm going to go to bed.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to turn this off. I'm going to go to bed and come back to this. And it's like, what's happening? Why is this character here in this room? It's like I had been playing the game for like 2 hours longer than I probably should have.
Yeah, that definitely happened to me more and more. It definitely had the pace of a novel where like I read it in short bursts early on, and then by the end I was just mainlining hundreds of pages. But yes, Natsuno's is great. Yuki, I really love Yuki's because of this detective story setup, and she has this is hard to explain, the version of Tamao Kurabe, who is actually possessed by 427 and is pretending to be her like sidekick, whose name I forget. And is really fucking funny in all of those scenes. Yes. And all of her dialogue is great. She's got this one like random line that will recur if she has nothing else to say, which is like, I realized the culprit. It's someone bad.
No, like she's very funny. It is that like whole mindfuck of like it's the android made for Tamo Kurabe from one loop ago by Tetsu Ida, but she was destroyed basically by 427 that like invaded her. And there's like all the time, except for because it's the 427 invaded Tomi's android, because that's where you get what is maybe my favorite single like scene in the whole game, which is Yuki getting the flashback or whatever of Natsuno hiding in the fucking restroom while the androids fight outside, which is like, this game is so good at like suggesting what is happening without like literally showing it, and making it so much more effective than if you just like, because the game's budget and like the animation style and stuff, it wouldn't be able to have a cool android fight. So just like having Natsuno like in the bathroom like trying to cover her ears and hide, like put her like feet up so they can't see, and just hearing like this crazy fucking conversation.
The sound design is very good.
Yeah, this crazy conversation between these two robot people that are talking, and then it's just like shit starts breaking, and you just hear this is like what must be the gnarliest fucking Terminator fight ever. And like a window breaks, and Natsuno opens the door, the whole bathroom's fucking destroyed. It's such a good scene.
And the clue around all of that is there's this destroyed bathroom, and there's Tomi's glasses there, but they're not the actual Tomi's glasses. And so that is this, and I got that really early, because Yuki's is one of the first ones I kind of started mainlining.
I did hers a little bit later.
Interesting. Yeah, because, I mean, you do get walled off on Yuki for a while, and then it took me a while to come back around to her, but I had that clue about there's something else going on with Tomi, because this is her pair of red glasses, but she has her red glasses. And then, of course, you get all the stuff with, I think at some point I did Amaguchi's, and I got the stuff about Ida building the Tomi robot, and then the Tomi robot has Tomi in it, but then it doesn't have Tomi in it, it has 47 in it, but then 47 jumps into the Tamao android. It's
because
crazy.
The Tamo android wins the fight, but the Tomi android through 427 transmits his data into Tamo, who now is like pretending to be a different girl that is assuming the identity of a girl from Ninji's class that is sick. And then pretending to love detective stories and having some of the funniest dialogue in the game.
Yeah, I mean, 427 through Tomy or the Tomoe android and the cat and all this stuff. He's a guy who just really likes fucking with people.
Yeah.
Because he takes on these like really weird personas to push people in directions, and it's very funny.
Yeah, because I mean, he's got like actual like the Izumi Judo from the past,
Who basically is Kyle Bean from the Terminator. Like literally, he's got
Michael
the trench
Biehn,
coat. He's got
and he had the one time where he just had a loop where he's like, I'm just gonna murder everybody because you know what, like fuck it, like it's our fault that this apocalypse is happening, so I'm just gonna try to murder everybody. And then he is simultaneously a cat, the android, and Judo's friend.
Yes.
Right? Because he's just data, so it's like he's like different versions of his own self that he is using in different places, that he has like kind of spread like a virus amongst all these different people. It's very, very good shit.
Very good. Okay, so we talked about Yuki and Natsuno. We should probably talk about Keitaro Miura, who is paired with Natsuno. Although you don't get that for a little while in either of their stories. Because Keitaro has a really... he's one of the two characters, him and Hijiyama, who are from the 1940s, or they think they are. And so you have this very different perspective of... I've been doing a lot of, in my school research, a lot of reading about like the interwar period and everything leading up to World War II. And of course, the context for this is these kids would have been in, all schools were like nationalized and made into like, basically training for either literal military service or indoctrination into like the way of thought that they wanted people to have in this sort of like fascist Japanese regime. And
that's like what the old wood school building is.
Yes.
Is what they school specifically made for that.
Right.
And I like his like the game actually explains all of that in the like notes or whatever.
Right, I remember.
Which was like a helpful piece of context because that was something I knew but had not thought about from the context of this game. Like, oh right, yes.
I remember seeing that and I was wondering. I'm like, I wonder if that's in the original Japanese version of this game or if Atlas added it in localization.
Yeah.
But
there's a couple of things that they definitely added in localization because they translate some terms. I'm pretty sure that piece of information is in the original game.
Okay, cool.
Because all the stuff they add is in like parentheses that they put down at the bottom.
But I really love that Miura and Hijiyama both have this really radically different perspective because, I mean, God, Japan pre-1945, well, at least in that interwar, like 30 to 45 period, and then post-1945 are such different, like, societies in terms of, like, political thought for a lot of people.
Their whole political, like, government structure is completely different.
So, like...
education system is completely different.
Yeah, I mean, 1985 to 1945... There's lots of changes everywhere in the world, but like Miura talking to Natsuno, she might as well be an alien.
Yeah.
Like she's a woman, she's like a girl who gets to run track and have like the little shorts on that he thinks are underwear.
Yeah.
And like, that's just, is so alien to him. And he and Hijiyama both are like, they are also indoctrinated in the sense that like they think the Americans are going to come like invade like, which they were planning on, but like, it's a very different vision of like what the war actually was. They thought that they were going to have to defend the homeland like right there. They thought that they were also going to win. Like that's a big thing that like most Japanese citizens in Japan did not know Japan was losing the war until Hirohito got on the radio and said, "I've surrendered." And it was a massive shock. If you want to see a really good depiction of that, Grave of the Fireflies does that really well. Of that moment of like, what? I thought we were winning. And so both of them have that view, and so then they're sent to a future where they read the history books, and it's like, what about Hiroshima and Nagasaki?
Yeah, and it's like, that's like one of those things where it's like Miura, it was really mind-blowing to me, because I've like, because you get occasionally, like, because this is, again, it's its whole own sci-fi genre trope of the, like, fish out of water story, because you have the two time travel fish out of waters. You either have a person from the future goes to the past, or a person from the past comes to the present. And with Miura, like, I've just never seen that story, and there's probably like other examples of it from Japan, but I personally have not seen an example of here's someone from World War II in Japan coming to sometime later. And I think it's like that's one of the ones where like specifically it being the 80s is really significant, because there's this whole complex dynamic there of he has gone from like a time in Japan's history, like, again, moments before basically the nuclear bombs dropped, and then within the metaphor of the game, what effectively is what the kaiju are, and his whole world, like, burning around him, to then being teleported 40 years into the future into the most prosperous time in Japan's modern history, which is the mid-'80s. And
one of the most like remarkable capitalist success stories in human history.
Yes, yeah. And like all capitalist success stories, it's very temporary.
Yes,
but you have this one temporary time of like incredible wealth and affluence across a huge stretch of the country's population and its infrastructure and all of that. It's like
the level of modernization would be for one 40-year period is unbelievable.
Yeah, and to be faced with, we lost the war, and within a person's lifetime have gone to this place.
Yeah,
that is like the most prosperous time you could like imagine, right, for your country. And it's like that really like complex, weird mix of feelings. And then the other thing that really struck me was that like. Because you have this thing with both Miura and the early parts of Hijiyama's story, where after they get teleported to the 80s, they continually think for a while that the kaiju, that the daimos that destroyed 1940s Japan were American weapons sent by America to destroy Japan to end the war, and they think that, and like they let them think that for a little bit. And it was that thing of like, at first it was like, well, that's ridiculous. And then Miura reads the history textbook or whatever and reads the section about the nuclear bombs and how many people died and everything in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I'm like, oh, no, it's not ridiculous. Yeah, no. It's like, it's not that different from what happened in a way. That it's like, and that's where it's like, it is only very like thinly a metaphor, because it's like, no, like this is like the nuclear bombs are like fucking monsters from the sky and from the future coming down and
it was a weapon that had never been used. It was we were splitting the atom for the first time over a country.
Yeah,
you know,
and so it's just this like unprecedented military technology that like the scope of the destruction it entails in like one strike for each bomb is just like is utterly absurd and like beyond the scope of like logic or like perspective for one person in that moment to have. And so it's like there's something about that was incredibly effective to me. Like getting that perspective in the way they frame it.
When you talk about all the multiple apocalypses, 1945 was an apocalypse for Japan. And I think people focus on the atomic bombs, but you've got to remember the context that Keitaro is living in when we meet him is the firebombing campaign, which ultimately killed, I think, just as many people as the nuclear bombs. More people, and obviously destroyed, all sorts of regions of the country. I mean, for film history, what I study, one of the things I learned is that by the time the nuclear bombs dropped, before then, like in 1945, movies, like propaganda movies, were still being made. There was nowhere to release them because the vast majority of Japanese movie theaters, of which there were many before the war, were firebombed. They were just destroyed. They weren't being targeted. There was not an American military campaign of they can't watch movies. It was just everything was destroyed. Yeah. And then it climaxed with these nuclear bombs. But he and Hijiyama are living in what would feel like an apocalypse, which effectively was.
Yeah, like when the sort of klaxons go off of like there is like an emergency happening, their immediate thought is like, oh, they're firebombing our town. So it's like that whole framing, and then that sort of like, so all that World War II stuff and the perspective you get through Miura and everything, like it also forms, I think, one of like the core bases of like what it is doing with like sort of using all the sci-fi tropes and examining them is like, I like that it takes everything back and like contextualizes it all in reference to the nuclear bomb drop, which is like in many ways, there's a lot of influences that happen that like cause this stuff to happen, but like one of like the core things that from which a lot of modern tokusatsu or like Japanese science fiction is produced, obviously most notably through Godzilla in 1954, which then is like recontextualized within the game's history as the mighty kaiju daimos, which is then the thing that creates the game, that then creates like the code base or whatever that Okino in the real world uses, that like Godzilla is the apocalypse, right? Like the cultural artifact of Godzilla is what creates the apocalypse of daimos or whatever in the future, birthed ultimately from the nuclear fire.
Well, literally, it's from these psychological scars passed down culturally over time.
Yeah, that trauma that lives through.
Right. Because most people who remember it are gone now in 2020. there are still some Japanese people live a long time, but like most people working on this game weren't alive then, right? But those psychological scars exist because it was filtered out through all of this culture. And as silly as Godzilla ultimately gets, that doesn't change his origin. And it does. And as many other kaiju are made, it doesn't change that the origin of the kaiju genre is. Yeah. Let's work out this stuff through special effects filmmaking.
Yeah, and that, you get, what is it, like 6 years ago, or a little bit less than that now, of Shin Godzilla coming out.
Yeah.
And, that movie was like a huge box office success, like a big, phenomena in Japan when it came out. And it is connected directly to that legacy, right? Traumas like that don't just go away. Obviously, it's more recent relatively for us, but the trauma, the national cultural trauma in America of 9/11 will be omnipresent in our culture for at least our fucking lifetimes, right? Everything that comes out, every Marvel movie exists in relation to that in some way. You can't look at images of city destruction, stories of heroism in America are always filtered through that perspective because those traumas, even as I am teaching people who were born years now after 9/11 happened, for them, that is still a thing that, whether they are aware of it or not, the media and art and culture they consume that informs their worldview is made with that trauma as a part of it.
Yeah. COVID will be that.
Yes.
Now for 100 years.
Yeah.
But it's there are some forms of, in all the research I do, where American or Western writers try to, psychoanalyze and psychologize Japan that I really fucking hate.
Yeah.
But historically, it is perfectly fair to make the conclusion that there are wide genres of media that Japan has that other countries don't, because they're the only country that had the bomb dropped on them. It is not wrong, and I think a lot of Japanese scholars would be the first to say this, that the sheer amount of mecha stories and stories about technology and humans' relationship with it and stuff, it is not solely reducible to the atom bomb. But those tentacles go very far, you know?
And hooking into Weekly Stu Gundam, right? Tomino was alive then, right? Yeah. And the people that also influenced him very directly, like Osamu Tezuka, were alive.
Yeah, I mean, if you view Tezuka himself as the bomb that started anime, the Big Bang, I mean, he lived through it and cartooned through it. And then he came out, and Astro Boy is a really very direct response to a lot of that.
And then, Gundam, its themes are clearly made. I mean, it literally name drops fucking Hitler in the original Gundam, right? It is clearly made in reflection of that, in, looking at and being conflicted by our relationship to the military and our relationship to technology and weaponry.
And I think
the advancement of weapons technology and when it reflects on human nature.
And I think 13 Sentinels, as a game, being so in conversation with so many kinds of anime and manga genres is really interesting in this sense too, because in many ways anime and manga as we understand them were birthed by the war. Because there were forms of Japanese animation and manga before Tezuka and before the war, and there are all sorts of precursors, but the generation, Tezuka's generation, that started anime and manga as it is now understood are people who were young people, literally the protagonists of this game. They would have been Miura's age in 1945, and they worked in munitions factories, and some of them were soldiers, and they lost friends, and they lost homes, and these kinds of things, and then they went and wrote about it, and it influenced that. And so if you're working in anime, you're working in a legacy that started there. And again, not all anime is reducible to that. Some anime is only tenuously related to it, but it is this arc that I think this game is very, it doesn't bring it into the text strictly, but it's very aware of it.
Yeah, I mean, it feels very particular that World War II plays such a notable figure. And it was especially, again, being a Godzilla person, it was that because you get the Mighty Kaiju Daimos thing, the poster or whatever that Kurobe has that you can look at in his inventory, that is just, I mean, I literally have that fucking Godzilla poster in my room because I love Godzilla so much. So it's that's the Godzilla font. That's just Godzilla. And then 30 minutes later, I'm playing a character in World War II that is watching his entire fucking town get destroyed by giant monsters. I'm the game is working on my sort of reference level for the media I consume, and Godzilla being my favorite movie, the themes and imagery and stuff that is fascinating to me. and I think it's really important that the game like frames everything with that as like its sort of like genesis, right? It reminded me a lot of episode 8 of Twin Peaks: The Return, and using that as like for the other side of America being the country that dropped the bomb, and that being like, we talked about that on the Twin Peaks podcast, as it representing as this like original sin from which like modern America is born, is with that nuclear bomb. And it's like, it feels like it's 13 Sentinels is using the same event to as this framing of, this is like the thing that creates everything, right? This is there's a reason why it is the first point in Japan's history that the scientist people in the future, like, where does this all happen? Where does it start? And it's like getting set in motion by this event.
It's anyway, Keitaro Miura is a good character. That's where this all started.
And that's where like, you know, you're filtering all of that
right
through his perspective in that early part. And it's like, you know, him fucking going back to the house, right? Even though it's not that, you know, when you realize like the whole what's literally happening, it isn't the same house. There's a reason why the house is standing,
right?
Is because it is, that house has been duplicated for every time zone in which it's supposed to exist in. But what for him is like the same house that this like family friends lived at, and that he lived with them for a while, and Chihiro, his little sister, was there, and him going back in like living there again.
And she made a little dent in the wall, and it's still there. Or in the pillar. I mean, I love, because I think you encounter Keitaro as like the guy who comes to live with Juro before you unlock him. And it's like, who the fuck is this? And he's dressed. I mean, he's got this old-timey 40s uniform.
Wearing his fucking 40s uniform the whole time, which I love.
Which is great. I mean, down to like, I love the detail of like his legs are like, it's these wrappings around his legs. You know, very like you know, old school kind of thing. Mm-hmm. He's got that fucking hat, which is so, it's you know, you can tell it's a uniform that's a little more military inspired from the time. I mean, the way they use uniforms overall in this game is one of the fascinating things about it, and the different characters who have different uniforms. But his is great, and I love that he's just this polite, you know, nice boy living in a world he does not understand. And for him and Hijiyama, in very different ways, because they could be repetitive, but they're not, going through a sort of process of deprogramming and relearning the world. Really great stuff. Yeah. We should talk about Hijiyama.
Yes.
Because he's one he's Miura's senpai. He's like been in the military a little longer. He's like his commander sort of thing. Neither of them are like high up, but Hijiyama has an actual military uniform when we first meet him, like a Navy kind of thing. Would be like the U.S. touch.
Yeah, his white uniform.
And Hijiyama touches on, like, one, he has the funniest story. His is great.
Because I love the kid, like, he's paired with Okino, obviously, and I love that you play him and you don't play Okino. Partially because you find out that's like, well, this Okino is like not real. He's also a digital construct. But I just love that, like, for Hijiyama's story, Okino is the one who's doing all the important shit. And he's just like on the edges of it, and like most of the time you play as him is just running around scrounging for spare fucking change from Baizuma Yakisoba-pan, while like Okino is off doing like important shit.
That's exactly, and it's one of the most fun ones to play because of that, because it's like weirdly a mix of like utterly low stakes, this one guy who doesn't have a place to live and doesn't have any money and isn't really at the school, and it's just like scrounging daily to get his Yakisoba-pan. But the most important stuff is going on over here with the person he is also in a like wild flirtatious relationship with, and so this one also touches on sexuality in ways that feel pretty frank and progressive for a Japanese video game.
I was because for most of the game, you know, they're doing what is like a very standard thing of sort of like flirting around the edges of a like sort of non-normative sexuality for him and Okino that is like filtered through cross-dressing, which is, you know, like, it's a very standard kind of anime manga trope. Like, I mean, Persona 4 obviously does like all this shit with Naoto. And for that I was like this is like, some of it's fine, some of it is like playing into some of those tropes that like really get on my nerves. But then you get the scene from the future of them, and it's like, oh, they're just literally in a relationship with each other in like the original like normal real world in 2188.
And they're both men in that case, and it's just
and there's no cross-dressing or anything involved. It's just like, it's a like one of the most like frank, like straightforward representations of a gay relationship I've seen in an otaku style media that is not literally about that, right? Like, there's plenty of stuff that is about that. It is particularly if you're like looking for like more outsider style manga and stuff. You can find lots of it. But for like a big, I mean, it's not like big, but like a full published
PS4 game.
Yeah, it's a PS4 game that's made by Vanillaware, that is like a very well respected studio that has done like well for themselves, has made like a number of games that people really love, and that this game is not about it's not like about romance. It has romance in it, but it's not a like romance game. And that it's also like not about a gay romance specifically. For it to like have that representation, it for be like just like frank and straightforward. I think it's like it does such a good job of recontextualizing everything. Of the reason why everything else has to be filtered that way is because this is a man who grew up in the 1940s who does not understand, or who grew up in the 1930s and doesn't understand or has no framework, no context for understanding himself as being gay, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's like I really love that framing of you get this recognition by the game very explicitly of like, this is a thing that is normal, that these two characters being in love is totally normal, but the cultural like biases that specifically Hijiyama has from when, because Okino is just having fun with it. Like, he clearly has no, because Okino in the game is from like the 21 whatever, like the furthest timeline that the simulation has. So Hijiyama having this like conflict within himself about how he should feel about Okino, like, I think is actually really remarkably well done.
Oh, I agree. And I think part of it is also, like, when you talk about the trope of, like, the flirtation and cross-dressing and stuff, usually that's done with characters on, like, an even cultural footing. But it's not. Hijiyama is from the 40s. He's from World War II. And Okino is from a future where we assume homosexuality is also normalized to a certain degree, right? And so Okino is playing with him in a very different way. And, like, there's something, like, almost vaguely mean about it at times. Not vaguely, it is mean what he's doing, but also like Okino doesn't view it as something Hijiyama should be ashamed of.
And so Okino is like kind of amused by the fact that he is, right?
Yeah, it's like this fucking bumpkin.
Yeah,
who doesn't get any of this, right? It's good. I was a little disappointed, I will say, in the like end credits montage thing when they go back and they still kind of resume the like kind of flirtation thing, but like Hijiyama didn't feel like he still was acting like he did in like the main body of the game, and I feel like he shouldn't have moved past that by now, especially once he gets out of the pod and is like, you know, oh shit, it's been a long time since any of that shit happened.
Yeah, I agree that I wish that they had carried it on more rather than, like, I kind of understand why they want to, like, just like, it's like the running joke that you associate with the character, like, let's just keep it going, because they spend like a minute on it or whatever, because they go through all the characters. But I agree. I wish that they had done something to show how their relationship had advanced, like in Eden or whatever that they end up in at the end.
Yeah. But we haven't talked about the most important thing about Hijiyama, which is the yakisoba pan.
Yes.
Which is one of the best things in the whole game. And as you said on our Best of the Year podcast, it's something that starts funny. They do it so much that you're like, maybe they're doing this too much, and then it comes back around to being fucking hilarious.
Yeah, it's. I think for me, it's that thing of, there's a couple of places where it gets very funny. I think like every aspect of it that Megami is involved in is the fucking most hilarious shit. Where in the localization, he calls her the yakisoba pan angel. In I like it even more in Japanese because he just calls her yakisoba pan no kimi, which is like the girl with the like you with the yakisoba pan is like the most literal translation. But it's like this very fond way to refer to this like person that's like feels so dear to him that he doesn't know the name of. There's something so hilarious I find about like that term, and the way that the actor delivers it is hilarious.
And then in the like final battles,
yes,
when you realize he still doesn't know her name, they never really like formally met, and that's just still what he calls her in the Sentinel.
Yeah, when he says that like to her through the Sentinel is like it's one of the hardest I've laughed at the game. Is that, and then also the first time you go to the cafeteria and get it, and he fucking like collapses to his knees because it's like, this is a game that I think has really great animation, but it's also very minimalist with it because it's a big game. It's not a big team. They're not going to like have a bunch of unique animations all the time. So that's one of the places where like them doing the whole like android fight off screen and just using sound effects and everything and like screen shaking to suggest it is very effective and smart use of their budget and time. I love that they used a unique animation that the only time it plays. There's not like another time in the game where he collapses to his knees. It's only when he eats yakisoba pan and is so just like assaulted by. I mean, for me, like I think it's supposed to be like a commentary on the like ridiculous additives and everything we put in our food now, and how it's just like it just must be such a fucking ridiculous explosion of taste for him. Like,
well, keep in mind also, if he's from a 40s context, you would have had heavy rationing, starvation all over Japan. He was in the military, so he was probably well fed, but like minimally and with like bland, just rice is what they would have had.
Yeah, in this like here you just get this like nice, like because the yakisoba pan thing as like the school cafeteria food it's just like it's not like bad for you kind of junk food, but it is basically junk food. Like it's like a junk food kind of like school lunch cafeteria, whatever.
If you don't know, it's basically yakisoba noodles put inside like kind of a hot dog bun kind of thing. And then like with some sauce on it and stuff, and it's also street food in Japan.
Yeah, exactly. This is the kind of food you buy on like a food stall or something like that. And so it's like you just sort of collapsing, and then I love that you get because then you get the other kind of joke around that, where I think it like really sort of like is the zenith of the humor of this game. Is Miura also has a very shorter running joke, but he has a running joke about how much he likes Hamburg steak.
Yes.
And
when they meet.
Yes, and he has like this thing of like where he pronounces it slightly wrong as like this, and I wish I knew what the Japanese like, because I think they probably like write it in hiragana or something, where it's just like he's just like doesn't really understand the concept of the history of the Hamburg steak in Japan, and so he's like it's like this legendary food item for him. And so then when they meet and they're both like sharing their stories of it's like, oh, it's the most delicious food ever, yakisoba pan's so good, and Mia's like, well, have you ever had Hamburg steak?
And it's two like super common Japanese. You could, if you were playing this game in Japan and you heard that, you could probably put your controller down, walk outside, and you are in walking distance of buying one of those two things.
And if you like, I mean, that's like the kind of thing where for me, like the amount of anime I've watched, like it is like those are like the two most cliche pieces of food like you would ever get. And so it is, it's just this very funny exchange that those two characters have when they meet again. Yeah.
Oh, it's great. Yeah, I love those guys. Love those characters. Okay, we have done most of them. We haven't done Megumi Yakushiji yet.
Yes.
Who is, of course, the woman who invites Keitaro into the home.
Yes.
And Megumi has one of the weirdest... She has the weirdest story.
Yeah. Hers, I love hers because she's like the character that feels like she kind of brings all the characters. I mean, she literally brings them all together in the sense that like her mission, you discover, is she's injecting them with the nano machines that they need to pilot the Sentinels and like have the modified version of the game or whatever that they're playing so that they can win. But I love that she just like intersects everybody's story, because sometimes you see her shooting people from her perspective as you're playing it, and sometimes those scenes happen when you're playing like the other character and stuff like that. And I love her ability to sort of like jump around the stories as this mysterious figure doing some like magic bullshit thing.
I also think her frame of how her story starts is one of the most compelling.
Yeah.
And I feel like I've now said this about most of the characters, and so really I should just say this game really starts all of its stories very well.
Yeah.
But hers is really great. I see you have it up here, the Boy from the Future event, where she and Tomi and Megumi is of 1985, right?
She's from the 2020s.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Sorry. So she and Tomi are both back from the 2020s.
Yeah, they are like I would be teaching them or something.
Right. So they're in the 2020s, and Juro from a different point in the future.
Yeah, it's Izumi Juro from the future that they have their first like defense against the kaiju
in 2065 or something,
and that's where like the virus gets spread to all of them.
Yes,
and they all get sent to different time zones. He's the only one who's sent to the 2020s.
Right. So this is like our only glimpse of like normal 2020s life.
Yeah.
Before Megumi and Tomi are sent back, and the whole city is because most of what we see over the 2020s is complete utter destruction.
Yes. Which is accurate to I think 5 years. I think like it'll just be destruction around the world.
They could, like a lot of artists, they could not have known when this game was coming out the world would be in fucking crisis. Anyway, but yes. So I really love when I said on our top 10 list, I said one of the things this game does well is showing you the scale of mecha. This is the scene I'm thinking of, because the way it plays, they're walking by the river in the rain. It's very much like in Persona 4 when you're walking along like the drainage path to the school, like all of that stuff. And then there's a flash, and this fucking giant robot is in the water next to them. That is an amazing moment of production value. And again, it's just drawings that they're doing. It's a small little team that's made this, but it is genuinely, it's awe-inspiring in the sense of like some of the stuff in like Shin Gojira is awe-inspiring to me. And then of course Juro teleports out of it, and then you have an ellipses implying that they fell in love here and all of that. But this is how she met this guy. But then we jump forward to the start of her story is really in the 80s. She and Tomi are settled. Juro is Kurabe now.
Yeah.
And that is such a like fucking blow that she had this boyfriend and now he doesn't even remember who he is, let alone who she is. And then a cat offers her a contract.
Yes.
What a great fucking opening.
Yeah, it is just this killer, like I need you to shoot witches. And the cat, which is like obviously a play off of Sailor Moon, who has her cat, Luna, and it's just like, it's the kind of thing where like if they picked one story to be we're gonna do an anime like OVA or whatever of like 13 Sentinels, it's like you obviously couldn't do it for the whole game. But if you wanted to like do like one cool special one-off anime project, I would love to just have Megumi's full story animated, and have like flashbacks to her life with Judo and stuff like that, because it's one of the parts of the game that is like the most suggestive to me, like because I think partially because of the magical girl stuff so exists on an island, because the rest of the game is way more sci-fi than it is the sort of more fantasy thing that the magical girl thing is. And obviously, like as soon as you encounter it, it's like this is not magic. Obviously, like she's been given this weird like syringe gun to shoot people with.
That looks a lot like other guns we see in the game.
Yeah, so it's like that it's like more mechanical and stuff like that. But there's something about that element of the game. And Megumi is like psychologically so isolated from other characters because nobody else knows that she's doing this for basically the whole game. That it does, I think, make her story feel so compelling unto itself. And I just love how evocative her relationship with Izumi Judo is, and it is when you get those like brief glimpses of that sense of this is a relationship that was so important that he was willing to both like destroy himself psychologically, but like you said earlier, like he fought on his own for 8 hours in one Sentinel against the entire invasion. For as long as he could to make sure to try to not even just to save her life because he knew that they were going to get teleported into the 80s, but like to try to protect like the city and her friends and family, the things that she loved and cared about. Like it's just such an evocative relationship because you're only seeing the edges of it. That I think the game does such a good job of making you like really feel what Megumi feels by getting those little glimpses that you get.
Yeah, and you have her like trying to turn herself into a homemaker, almost like this playing house husband-wife situation she creates, which is part of the contract with the cat and all this stuff. But I really love how I was really prepared for it to go in a pretty dark direction, and instead it goes in a pretty like hopeful direction of Juro like being like, I'm not him, but I do like you.
Yeah.
And her kind of accepting like, okay, she's done some bad shit, but the cat isn't just a completely evil like manipulator.
Yeah.
In the same way Juro has to accept 247 is like his other self. Mm-hmm. It's really interesting, and I love how both those stories intersect and end. And I don't even remember some of like what's in Juro's and what's in hers.
Because they had so much of them.
Overlap.
Around each
but
other,
like many of these stories end with a moment of empowerment of the character, like choosing that I'm going to find the Sentinel. But hers feels like particularly empowering because of where she's been. Yeah,
and I do really like the last few scenes you get with the cat, and you get like how conflicted he is about his, like it's that moment where you realize that he did earnestly try to bring back the Izumi Judo's personality that was shattered in Kurabe, and couldn't find a way to do it. And it's that realization of like obviously he was working towards his own goals also, but like there's something about that moment where you realize like that relationship that Megumi and Fluffy had like was like earnest, like there was something really real there beneath all like the teasing and bullshitting and stuff like that.
Also, that cat voice actor, it's so good. It's such a good performance.
And that's another place where like the art team and the animation team just did such a good job with the cat. Like it just looks so fucking good, and like it just looks so fucking grumpy and world weary whenever it's in a scene with Megumi that I just adore.
Absolutely, I would take a series about the cat. Not even like this version of the cat, just like the cat we see in the daily life, just going around doing shit. Mm-hmm. It's a good cat.
Cat.
Okay, we've done almost everyone. I think we haven't done Goto and Amiguchi.
Yes.
Amiguchi, his is fun. His is, I would say, on its own, one of the more kind of fractal stories, because it doesn't have, like, his ending is really resolved in someone else's story, and his is kind of all over the place, and mostly about the voice in his TV and the idol
Yugi
stuff.
Inaba.
Yeah, and the different dreams of Tetsuya Ida. But it is still a fun one, and I do like Amiguchi as a character quite a bit.
Yeah. That has, like, one of those moments I really like where he goes through the tunnel or whatever to the edge of the simulation and finds it's just, like, that was one of those I remember, like, hitting that scene and, like, it blowing my mind. And that was, like, the one that was like, okay, this must be, like, some sort of weird simulation, because you're just operating on this assumption. And I think the reason why they do this so well is that Okino is one of those characters you believe, like, knows everything about what's happening. And Okino himself is so shocked when he finds this out, because he's like, well, what about the rest of the world? Like, I've been communicating, I've been, like, sending information to America and all this kind of shit. It's like, there must be the rest of the world out there. Yeah. And every character, including him, is just operating on this assumption that it's the whole world that is experiencing this. And then you realize, like, no, it's this one, like, city in glass, basically, that you are all living in. Like, that whole sequence is really good. But I agree with you. I feel like he's kind of used to deliver a lot of, like, that. He's kind of, in many ways, his story is a cipher to get a lot of, like, the bigger picture stuff to sort of all fit into place, including Tetsuya Ida as, like, our sort of, like, pseudo antagonist for a lot of the game.
And he also has, Amaguchi has just very significant character development in other people's stories.
Yes.
Like all of his stuff with Yuki. Some of that is in his story, but some of it isn't. And I do love the two of them together. It's very funny. And yeah, but Amaguchi's good. And then we have Renya Goto, who I think I did not trust for much of this game, and then came to very much respect. I thought he might be the Light Yagami of the game, but he's the L.
No, he's the student council president in proper anime fashion. That is, like, he's some sort of, like, super genius man.
Yes.
It's one of my favorite tropes in all of anime is that, like, the student council is, like, super important, and that the leader of the student council is, like, fucking Sherlock Holmes.
It's one of those questions I actually genuinely have about Japanese culture. Is like, is the student council, like, surely they don't have as much power as they seem to have. But
no,
like,
because, in most anime, they, like, secretly run the school.
Right.
Yeah.
But, like, is it actually that much of, like, a social, like, clique function kind of thing? And, like, then are the, like, super crazy high achievers in it like that?
Right.
I just don't know.
Yeah, I don't know really the answer to that either, because it's another. Because I imagine it's probably, like, there's a little bit of that, but I think it kind of feels to me like one of those things where it probably was more true in the past, and it's just sort of, like, stuck around as, like, a weird trope, kind of like, you know, Natsumi wearing the bloomers or whatever as a gym uniform thing, which from what I understand, like, I think is actually accurate to the game's setting, but it's like a trope that continues to be used in anime long past that actually being a fucking school uniform that actual Japanese schools use.
Yeah. But yeah, so Goto's, I don't even really remember how Goto starts, other than it being kind of a montage of, like, different moments in time to place him as, like, a guy who's in charge of a lot of shit. But the majority of his story, because you get a bunch of it through other people's stories of he's the one who kidnaps little Chihiro, they're going around together a bunch, and then most of his story is framed as this last conversation between the two of them in the park where he's got his fucking notebook out and is putting it together. Yeah. And I do love the absolute baller move of collecting the evidence and then making the true but big leap assumption of, you are a space lady from 2188.
Yes, which also is, like, millions of years ago. And it's like...
That is, like, one of those that is, like, one of those, like, preternaturally smart, like, Sherlock Holmes kind of jumps of, like, this sounds fucking impossible, but if you've eliminated what can't be true, what remains has to be the answer.
Yeah. So, and I love the way they play that whole thing out of him. Like, he clearly, like, from the beginning of that sequence knows everything, but he is, like, letting on. Like, he doesn't to try to get little girl Chihiro to, like, admit to more and more. Yeah. Also, ultimately culminating in the, like... Because I think you learn this from another perspective, so the audience already knows this, but getting her to admit it, that, like, little Chihiro is the one that murdered the Chihiro that we know, which is a great fucking reveal as like the murderer from Sekigahara's story. It's like, oh no, it's like Miura's 8-year-old little sister actually rolled up and like murdered her past/future self.
Also, just the performance of little evil Chihiro is so good. And then, you know, she does become a bit of a heroic figure because she is moved enough. Because Renya, basically, the big point of his story is he makes this bet with her of like, I bet we can win.
Yeah.
And if we do, you have to trust us. Because her whole idea is that she's going to keep resetting this thing until she gets it right. And his idea is, no, we can get this right. And if we do, you have to back off. And then, of course, in the climax sequence, she does help them. And it's a nice sequence.
Yeah. But it is that thing where they sort of like use Dinya as this character as like, this is how we deliver the climax. Because that was one of the things I was like wondering about while I was playing the whole game was how are they going to eventually they have to have something that brings it all together, and they do have like the whole, you know, you have your sequence that you're playing through with the tactic stuff, and then there's like it's sort of an epilogue scene stuff that plays after that. But I had assumed that eventually the game would like unlock a secret 14th thing that would be the like climax, but I think I like that they sort of stick to the framework and just use Ninya's story as like a sort of character to be able to deliver your climactic information and bring everything back together to this one character that like knows everything.
Yes, and as you said earlier, the voice actor who does it, A+.
So good.
Yeah, so good.
We've talked about him before because he was the bread maker dude in Turn A Gundam.
Yes. And of course, I know Nenji Ogata is also
Tomokazu Seki, who's Domon.
He's in everything, but one of the things he's in is Doma.
Yeah, no, this is a very good voice cast. Shimano Hiro plays Judo, and he does a very good job. He's a voice actor I like a lot.
Can you imagine what it must have been like to like get the script for this fucking thing and then record it and be like, and probably just constantly asking like, what the hell am I talking about?
Yeah, like imagine that, but this game has a full English dub. Imagine being a fucking dub actor. Like there's some interviews going around with like the localization person for the game, like the localization director, whoever it is, talking about like trying to do that. And imagine you're trying to do that. You are localizing this game. You're getting voice actors to try to voice these characters and do all this stuff that they're going to have no fucking idea what's going on. And a pandemic's happening at the same time.
Because a lot of the localization happened after the lockdown, so they had to like get actors to do it in their homes, and
it's like what a fucking like incredible effort the localization was. It's like you know, I didn't personally use the English dub, but I always appreciate that exists because I know there are lots of people that like really need it or want it or prefer it.
I did switch over a couple of times on scenes I'd already watched just because I was curious, and it sounded like, to my ear, like a standard Atlas dub, which is a very good one.
Yeah.
The only voice I heard I didn't like was the cat was like weirdly Brooklyn. I didn't really get it, but like everything else, like and just you can read the script because the script you're reading is, and it's a totally. Sometimes there's some liberties taken, but they're fine.
I found the localization in terms of like its translation of the Japanese to be incredibly well done. Like, I think it's like a very well put together.
It's actually a very good game for practicing your Japanese because all the sentences are short. And it's like one sentences you have to compare, and you can read the English and hear the Japanese and be like, oh, I see that construction, and like learn about grammar a little bit.
That's a large part about how I took that step. That's like most of the visual novels I played, like I did it that way because it's the standard function of visual novels is you have the log that you can bring up and you can replay voice lines if you are practicing Japanese and want to like practice your like just generally practice it, but especially like your listening comprehension and stuff like that. That is like I think that's like the best thing you can do because you get a dope visual novel to play, and you can repeat things over and over, and if you have a Japanese version of it, you can see the kanji and everything as well. It's a very good tool.
Awesome. So then we have the ending itself, and I said on the podcast of our top 10 that I found it not disappointing because I don't think it's bad or anything. It's very good, in fact, but it's just a little deflating in seeing it all come together, and I think it's because I have a general resistance to the trope of it was all a simulation or something like that. I think like one of the reasons The Matrix does it uniquely well is because, well, I mean, it's a first act twist. It's not a third act twist. But also like the characters abjectly reject the reality of that simulation and are fighting against it. But I think a lot of ones that do it can feel like a cop-out. I don't think this feels like a cop-out at all. It's just there is something about like it's a little more rote than I think I was expecting. As I've sat with it, I like it just fine, because it is a good explanation that explains everything. Some of it felt maybe a little too neat to me, but I do think thematically the way it all ties together, of a destroyed humanity having left this creation, that one touch I love is that throughout the game, when any of the characters are in the pods, they're naked.
Yes.
And you notice that, and you sit with it, and you live with it, and then the ultimate revelation is, oh, because those pods are pods. It's like they're in the Matrix goo.
That's that moment where, because Okino is the guy who designed the Sentinels, and he says, it's like, there is no cockpit. Like, I didn't make a cockpit. I'm like, well, what the fuck does that mean? And you realize, like, oh, right, because it's all fake, and like what you are seeing is them. Yeah. Like the actual people.
Yeah. And I think that's a really cool touch. And I do like the final. I mean, it is a very evocative idea of actually like going out and starting this new society. One thing I think is a really interesting point the game does is not showing this Eden thing. Mm-hmm. You do get an image of Megami and Juro
like,
outside the pod.
Yeah, like naked with like nature in front of them, basically. Yeah.
But that's it. You don't go out with them and see everything. You don't see the society they build. That is like not for us, weirdly. And I think that's a really good evocative touch to leave it on.
Yeah, it is a thing where I think it's inevitable for some elements of the ending. It's just like, not like disappointed is way too strong of a word, but like there's no way with like all the mysteries and like the crazy bullshit that's going on, there can't be an explanation that like satisfies that, because your imagination, and again, this is the thing that oftentimes the game actually uses very well, is that your imagination is way more powerful than anything it can give you, as long as your imagination is like given the right kind of fuel. But I think we've talked about this stuff on Weekly Suit Gundam. We will continue to talk about it on Weekly Suit Gundam, because it is a sort of like running element of the mecha genre and like the tropes associated with it. But I think it's like in a core identity and like a core piece of the genre, this is like, especially when we're talking about like Yoshiki Tomino and his like vision of Gundam and all of that, is like very clear. Is that like at its core, it's about like this hope for change and optimism in like the new generation, and that it's like oftentimes the old it's about the failures of the old generation, like the old bureaucrats and men that have like created the war and are sending young people to die in this war. It's about their failures, discarding their failures, learning from their mistakes, and like giving young people like the reins to improve and build something new, unfettered from the mistakes of us old people that have like fucked them up. Which I say us old people because we are the old people now. Right, Jonathan?
Well, we're getting there.
Yes, I am, as a teacher, I am one of the old people. Like, I am part of, like, the administration that is making the mistakes that they have to overcome for the future, right? It is, like, that concept. And so I think there's something that I think the game's instincts of just go for that in, like, the most earnest way possible.
The most like, maximalist way. I mean, it's literally go start a new planet.
Yeah, but, yeah, and, like, specifically with, like, the ending of, like, let's just go for it completely and just end on that moment and just go fucking completely biblical with it. And it is full Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve type imagery of a naked man and a naked woman on a unspoiled paradise planet to make of it what they will. Obviously, you also have like all their friends and stuff as well, but they're like ending on this like core symbol. I also love that like the relationship they land on ultimately. Like, one, it is the one that like I was personally the most invested in because I like Judo and Megami's relationship the most. But also I like that it is a new relationship, right? Yeah. It is one that did not exist in any previous iteration. It didn't exist in another loop. It is because, the old Izumi Judo 427, he is in love with his world's Chihiro, and like that's his relationship, and he gets that in the simulation, which I do like that those characters get to be reunited. But this is a relationship created in this experience with these two unique people, and they get to go forward to create their own new world, and it's not about destiny and their genes or whatever. It is just about them. Yes,
they became people, and it also gives you this link. They became these people in those pods, and then there's still those people when they come out. This is not it was all a dream ending.
Yeah, exactly.
That's very important. Yeah, I think even if you feel a little bit of, and I use the word deflation more than disappointment, because it's not that it's bad, it's just like the come down of like the high wearing off of all the confusion, right? You may get that a little bit plot-wise. Thematically, it is so true to itself that there's no point where I'm like, they fucked this up or this isn't what I was like. No, it's so organic. It's
Yeah.
so organic. And maybe that's part of the deflation, is just seeing it land the plane so smoothly after so much turbulence that you were experiencing in the air. But they do land it very smoothly, and thematically it's absolutely masterful.
Yeah, and it is like a great earnest ending that because for a long time I thought that like the game was going to be darker than what it was, partially because like visual novels typically are like get like extremely dark because they the genre has a tendency to be very melodramatic. But like then there are definitely dark things in the game for sure. Like there's a whole early moment, or like for me it was very early, of Judo having his dream of a past/future version of himself killing all of his friends, which is like, I mean, that is like his whole like main motivating thing. The reason why he refuses to be in a relationship with Megami for most of the game is because he remembers having killed her in a past life, basically. That's like, so it has a lot of those dark ideas, but it never really like dwells in it. And I like, there's something, especially like in like that 2020 mode and like me playing this in like the height of like, you know, me wrapping it up as like the fucking end of the semester was on fire with like all the bullshit that happened at the end of the school semester for me. That was just like, I was very happy to have a very happy ending, and like everyone gets to be in a relationship or whatever if they want to be, like, because, you know, like there's a couple of characters like Goto and Yoko that's like, it's kind of implied that's like, maybe like they dated in middle school once, which is a fucking hilarious image to me, because they are definitely the two characters that like, you have that one line that is like, yeah, they like went on a date in middle school because it was a thing that people did, and it's like, they're probably not going to be in a romantic relationship, but people get to be in romantic relationships. The people from the simulation get to live in their simulation and maybe get to escape, and like if they can build bodies for them to go out into the real world, and then our like Judo and Yodi or Megami from that original loop that had all that tragedy have experienced the whole scope of this story. They get to live again together in the simulation. Like having that like happy ending was very nice for me, and I was very happy to have it.
And another way you could put it is, I think it's an earned hopeful ending.
Yes.
It is an ending. It is one of these historical scale kind of works that sees, like Turn A Gundam, we talked about this with, of like seeing humanity on like a generational scale and saying the hope is in the broad movements towards something better that do exist in humanity, and that hopefully, even if we do bring the kaiju on ourselves, the kaiju are global warming.
Yes.
Maybe something better can be built out of those ashes eventually. Which, you know, maybe if you don't believe that, you just go insane.
Because you also get the other side of the game that is like the darker side of it, is that like, well, like the humanity that we live in, unless we live in a simulation, which is technically possible, very unlikely. The humanity that we are a part of in the this game's vision of the world has gone extinct, right? And that's a part of the game that we haven't talked about much in detail that I do really like. I like how like petty the ending of Mankind is in the game's viewpoint, right? That's like, you have like, generally speaking, most of humanity dies because of the nanomachine stuff, which one connects to our like nostalgia stuff from earlier in the discussion, because the nanomachines, the whole concept of the game talks about with them is that it's like they like store and create memories and stuff like that in dreams and all that, and that's part of like the weird sort of like dream reality state thing that our character is experiencing in the simulation, is through the mechanics of the real world nanomachine stuff that is invented and introduced at the end of the game, the simulation's timeline, right? And that's something you find out that the real world Chihiro created and sold basically just to get money to fund her like whole ARC project and the terraforming and all that shit. And it's like, she just wanted some money, so she sold this like nanomachine concept to a company that then manufactured it and sold it to a bunch of people, and it was on the black market and shit like that, and eventually brought humanity. We don't know like all the specifics of how that it like some virus or something transmits digitally from nanomachine to nanomachine, but it ultimately leads to the extermination of basically every human on the planet. You have these like, I think it's like 15 people, right? Because you have Okino and you have Kura or Tamo on the satellite or whatever, that with the ARC project, and those are like the 15 people that have survived, and they all die seemingly all for petty reasons, right? The Deimos thing exists in the game because Okino was or in the simulation, because he was a slightly lazy programmer and borrowed the simulation tech from an old like SimCity style game, right? And the whole, that's one of the best mystery files in the game, is if you read through the thing they have for like that game, that he uses. Like, it's actually like weirdly detailed and gives you a lot of information about why the stuff works in the simulation as it does, about why they track one person, because that's the person who's like determined as the protagonist of the game or whatever. All that stuff is like goes back to this like game code he borrowed, like not realizing that it created a weakness. Then it exploited by real world Ryoko because hates Tetsuya Ida because there's 15 people alive and he's like cheated on her with this other woman. I forget who it is in the real world. And so she's like, fuck it. Like there's 15 people left. Who gives a shit? Like, I'm just going to destroy all of this. And then just like petty arguments cause infighting that causes everyone to get shot. Okino gets killed, right? And then World War II dude in the real world then kills a bunch of people.
Sekigahara?
Yeah.
Or
No, Yakisoba Man. I forgot.
Oh, Hijiyama.
Yeah, Hijiyama like kills a bunch of people. And it's like you just get these little snippets where you realize this is all just petty bullshit. Like random arguments, like a lover's quarrel, someone needing some extra funding, so selling something they shouldn't have. Like all of this just like petty nonsense. That is what kills humanity. It's not like grandiose. It's like very small and intimate and dumb bullshit. And I love that vision of like that's how humanity ends, is over like petty squabbles basically.
Feels right.
Yeah. It feels right, right?
It feels right. Yeah.
Yeah.
When I'm depressed. This is a great game.
It's a great fucking game, yeah.
It's a great fucking game. We haven't even really touched on all the RTS stuff, but it is a lot of fun. It doesn't reinvent the wheel or anything.
Yeah.
But it is surprisingly like intuitive and good for what it is. I think they could have cleaned up some of the menus on the back end with like all the different things you can expect. Some of that takes a little too long to play with, but I had fun with it, and it breaks up the pace really well, and it feels properly epic within like the small scope the game is operating in.
Yeah, I love all the little like animations you get if you look at like when you select an attack or whatever, it opens a little window that shows the Sentinel like shooting a giant laser and shit. All that's good. Yeah, like it's a very good like very minimalistic way to evoke a lot of the sort of like standard cliche things you expect from big mech combat, like giant like balloons of missiles in that like Macross sense and all that kind of stuff.
It's really cool. I mean, some of those where you get, there's my favorite move in the game is the super large missile.
It's so
which
good.
Just blankets half the map. And
it's such a good name. I should look up what it is in Japanese, because whatever it is, the localization did a good job calling it the super large missile, and you're like, oh, it can't be that big, and then you pick it, and the area of effect circle is like the whole screen.
Yes.
It's just like, oh, this is great.
I basically, when I was going back and getting some S ranks on ones I missed, there was one map, Sean, where I S ranked, finished it in 2 moves. I did one super large missile that got rid of the first boss. They bring another one on, and I had my other long range do it, and did that, and then S ranked. It was hilarious.
Yeah, I think the thing I like about the strategy element is that it feels like the balance feels slightly broken in favor of the player.
Yeah.
In that like every Sentinel type, especially if once you get to learn how to use them and you upgrade them right, like all of them are like get ridiculously stupidly powerful. Like I think one thing I love, a big thing that I used a lot, were the sentry guns with the like Jiro's, like his generation of Sentinel, because it's like you're not really paying attention to them that much during the fight, but if you just keep on dropping sentry guns, and eventually I had one fight where I had so many sentry guns down that I couldn't place anymore, and like at that point I was like, well, I guess I could. I literally stopped doing moves with my other characters. I just like watched it as like the last 30 seconds of the round played out, as like 2 more waves of kaiju came in, and they just got fucking eviscerated because it was like 20 sentry guns or something. It was a stupid number of sentry guns, because I put all of my, I think it's 2nd generation Sentinels in that one match, and just had them, the only thing I had them do was just play sentry guns down.
Now I want to like go put the game back in and do that. That sounds fun.
It's a game that like the RTS thing, you can, if you play it to like the ludicrous degree that like some of those Sentinels can do different attacks and stuff, like you can just like kind of break the game in a way that's very fun.
I definitely found myself limited when I found it hard, or like I wasn't getting an S rank. It was usually because I was too much in the mode of like a different kind of tactics game, and then it's like, well, wait, no, I've got all this shit. I'll just use super large missile. Let me just pour points into this, and then I can use my super large missile 3 times in a row. Just go for it. The game does not want you to do that.
Yeah, exactly. The game like is like, and it almost feels like a like commentary or something on like, because the whole I love that moment where 427 tells you basically this is like it's literally a game. Like what you're playing is literally a game, and so but it's a game that is designed because of real world Ryoko or whatever to be unbeatable. So what I did is I gave you guys fucking points that you can spend to upgrade. And and when you hit that, obviously you had to play through 3 full fucking like waves or whatever, like level sets to get to that point. You're like, wait, so all the nano chip mystery point like all that shit is like literally contextualized within the world, like diegetically within the world of the games. Like I'm literally just spending points to upgrade my Sentinels, and that's the thing that lets you win. And that is the thing that like once you start using that effectively, it does like break the balance of the game. I don't know if that is like totally intentional, but it feels intentional. Yeah, it works. Worked for me so well of like, yes, like the game is busted. So like what I did was bust it in your favor is so fucking good.
Yes, it's great. I love because isn't he like as the cat giving that explanation?
Yes, that is the cat version of him is the one telling you all that. Yeah,
it's so good. Oh, and in all of this, Sean, we're wrapping up. We haven't even talked about that there's an idol singer and some of the battles happen with a fucking pop song in the background.
It's so good.
This game rocks.
It's a great game.
I'm glad we finally got to talk about it. If I had a little more distance, it might have been even higher on my top 10. I don't think it would have broken my top... It wouldn't have broken my top 2. I don't think it would have broken my top 3. It might have overtaken my 4, which was Paper Mario. These are very different games, so it's hard to hold them against each other. I think the point is we both think it's one of the best games of the year. That's what really matters. Yeah. If you have not... Well, you're not listening to this if you haven't played it.
Yeah, but if you haven't played it, this conversation would have been utter nonsense. Like, there's some games... Because I do this sometimes where it's like, I know I'm not going to play this game, but I'm curious about it. I'll listen to the spoiler cast or whatever on it, and it would make sense. This is not one of those conversations. No. Like, the number of times it's like, well, the real world Chihiro did this to the little girl Chihiro and put her consciousness in it. It's like, that's a sentence that doesn't make sense to you. Didn't play the game.
Nope. All right, so I think we're done with 13 Sentinels.
That game fucking rules, man.